Having been advised by the town clerk that we have a quorum, I'm announcing the reconvening of our 2021 annual town meeting. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to pick up at Article 26. Is my voice coming through okay on the sound? Very good. Recommended that the town appropriate the amount shown in the following tabulation under the heading recommended FY22. Total schools $54,186,246. And that to meet said appropriation, the sum of $54,186,246 be raised from the tax levy. By prior request, I'd like to, and by the way, submitted by the school committee, and I'd like to recommend the new chair, Margaret Eberhardt, followed by, I believe, Mr. Jett. So Ms. Eberhardt will have your deck up. And if you are there, you are recognized.
Hi, good evening. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Can everyone hear me? Hello?
I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, town meeting members. I am Margaret Eberhardt, chair of the Milton School Committee and town meeting member, precinct number 3. Thank you so much for giving us some time this evening to speak to our fiscal year 22 budget request. I wanted to take a moment to welcome our new school committee members, Elizabeth Carroll and Beverly Ross Denny, and to extend our sincere thanks and gratitude to Sheila Varela and Dr. Kevin Donahue for their years of service to the Milton Public Schools. Tonight, you are going to hear from Superintendent James Jett and Assistant Superintendent Amy Dexter. They are going to give you a brief overview of our budget as it breaks down by category and percentages. And then after their presentation, we'll be happy to answer any of your questions. At this time, I'd like to recognize Superintendent Jett and then after Assistant Superintendent Dexter. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, town meeting.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Jett, if you're there, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you, Chair Eberhardt. I understand the last 3 sessions of the town meeting have been very lengthy, and I want to try to be short and concise in my comments. I would like to express my appreciation for the strong town administrator, the warrant committee, and the select board for doing their due diligence around presenting a balanced budget for the town meeting members on Monday, May 3rd. I would also like to thank the school board members and Superintendent Dexter and Dr. Spalding and all 6 principals for their due diligence on creating a school budget proposal. Although we move forward with our ask to increase money to be taken out of the stabilization fund, by no means were our advocacy meant to be dismissive of other departments, such as, but not limited to, the fire, police, DPW, park and recs, library, council on aging. On the contrary, as educational leaders, it is our responsibility to advocate for the needs of the Milton Public Schools and our students, and we did just that. To be clear, we were advocating keeping 3 of the 6 positions that we were granted on December 7th at a special town meeting. These were positions that were needed and asked for prior to the pandemic, but were held in abeyance until December 7th. The pandemic simply exacerbated those needs. Despite the vote last Monday on Article 5, I wanted to share with the community some highlights of the Milton Public Schools during what was arguably the most challenging times in recent educational history. Milton Public Schools opened on September 16th, the first day public schools could open after a state-issued 10-day delay. Unlike other cities in town, there was no discussion of a holdout or a strike. In fact, 100% of our faculty and staff showed up on day 1. November 30th, we transition and pivot. Milton Public Schools afforded our students on IEPs and our sub-separate programs to attend 5 days of school, full day. February 8th, we pivoted models at the elementary level to allow for both cohorts to attend school each and every day for a minimum of 3 hours. February 27th, we made the announcement that all Milton Public Schools will return to school full in person. This was done 2 weeks prior to the Commissioner of Education's announcement that was made on Tuesday, March 9th. It is also important to note that many of the school districts that people compared us to from November all the way to February did not return to school on the 5th or the 12th. We've made significant advancement in technology as it pertains to teaching and learning. We scurried to put 2,200 Chromebooks in the hands of all of our elementary students, K-5, while other districts waited for their devices. I want to give special thanks to the Milton Foundation for Education, who supported us with technology professional development that supported our educators and thus supported our students. We increased the access of professional development to telehealth therapy in order to improve our service delivery to our most needy students. Each of our adjustment counselors worked all summer long throughout the weeks and during the vacation to support and stay connected to our most vulnerable students. And we put emphasis on building positive relationships. We purchased air purifiers for each classrooms that we were able to open and safely educate our students. Our food service personnel provided meals every Wednesday, last spring, all summer long, in each of the vacations on Wednesdays to our food insecure. Milton Public Schools coordinated with Manette Community Health Center to provide ongoing testing for our students, families, and educators. This was done back in November prior to other districts even making an attempt to create such a programming. We are currently in the process of planning our vaccination clinic. And as of 6 o'clock this evening, when they announced it, the vaccine, Pfizer vaccine, would be available for students 12 years old and older. We are working on that as we speak. Last week's town meeting sessions, we heard many statements about trust the process, transparency, and effectively communicating to our constituencies. Well, in the Milton Public Schools, we have done that. We've done that for the past few years with topics such as over-enrollment, school budget, school building project, social emotional needs of our students, the school budget, and the need for staffing to support the growing enrollment, and our equity audit. And we solicited feedback. To me, that was being transparent and communicating with our community. These discussions are well documented in the Milton Public Schools website and as part of many open meetings, such as school committee, finance subcommittee meetings, school building meetings, budget meetings, facility, and also in the superintendent's weekly blog and sometimes in standalone email updates to families. For the members of the community who do not have children in the Milton Public Schools, it is imperative to note that we have consolidated offices and classroom spaces such as art rooms, music rooms, the library, and change office spaces to accommodate our growing enrollment. So when comparing Milton Public Schools to other towns and cities, I think it is also important to compare the resources and how they are allocated. The budget is a reflection of what we value. If we want our students to be competitive when it comes to post-secondary opportunities, then we need to give them the resources, the supports, and the opportunities that they need now. In 2008, the town supported an override, which impacted residential taxes. In 2017, the town supported an override that impacted residential taxes. And here we are today, Monday, May 10, 2021, approximately 14 months into a national pandemic that will be remembered for shutting down our country, with school closures, limited travel, closures of buildings, organizations, entertainment venues, and so much more. All we were asking is for the town meeting members to consider taking out more money from the stabilization fund that is established for emergencies such as the pandemic. Although the vote did not go in our favor, we respect the process. So where do we go from here? Now is the time to change our focus from putting out fires to building up our schools. We need to move from what is urgent to what is important. We need to move from operational to strategy. And most importantly, as a town, we need to work more collaboratively and support our students. I'm looking forward to working with the stakeholders in our town to address the challenges that we faced before the pandemic and the challenges that we will face in the near future. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And I now yield my remaining time to Assistant Superintendent Amy Dexter to talk briefly about our budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jett. Ms. Dexter, you're recognized. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good evening, town meeting members, school officials, and other town officials. In response to last Monday's town meeting, several comments and questions were raised regarding the school bottom line presentation of the budget needs. In response to those comments, we are providing some additional detail. Please note, this is in addition to detail provided in the Table 8 of the town meeting warrant, as well as very detailed budget information included on Milton Public Schools website under School Committee, under Budget, that has been available since last fall. The first slide that you see before you is the school's needs-based budget request, which includes all Tier 1, Tier 2, as well as December 2023 2020 positions that were approved for a total of $55.5 million. These costs are presented by DESI category. Next slide, please. This slide presents basically the same information, the needs-based budget, just broken down in a summary level, showing that about 83% of the budget requested is salaries, 14% is contractual non-salary, and the remaining balance is other non-salary general expenditures. Next slide, please. And this last slide is in response mainly to those bottom line budget comments. What we are providing here is a detail of the appropriation that was approved in Article 5 last Monday evening of $520,000, combined with the Warrant Committee recommendation that's in front of you tonight in Article 26 for $54,186,246, which will result in, if approved, a total appropriation of $54,706,246 for the Milton Public Schools. The detail on this slide also shows it by different categories to provide additional detail so that town meeting members can get a better idea of where the money is spent. At this time, the Milton Public Schools budget request was discussed in length last Monday, so we're not planning on going into any further detail except for fielding any questions from the town meeting members. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We appreciate the presentation. By the way, members, we're making every effort to post all of these presentations as soon as we receive them, and I've reviewed them, to the town meeting page on the town website. You can get there by going through the town clerk to town meeting, or from the town moderator page, or search for town meeting. So these things will live on. You can go see them live now, or so with that, I'll look. Does anyone wish to speak to this recommendation? I see no hands are raised. I see one hand. Mr. Fahey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Sean Fahey from Precinct 9. I have a question. It's maybe in part a follow-up to a question that Mr. Walker made at the last town meeting. And his question was in regard to the term he used was salary attrition. And I believe his reference was to when an experienced teacher retires and they're probably replaced by a less experienced teacher, there must be a savings recognized. And my question is, as town meeting members, how would we be able to see this this component of a budget and what savings is I guess achieved on an annual basis when such a transition in staff occurs?
We will endeavor to find out. Mr. Jett or Ms. Dexter, might you have that answer?
I can take that question, Mr. Moderator. Last week, I didn't have the information, but we did pull it together for fiscal year 22, the expected cost differential between retirements and projected replacements. At this time, there's 5 known expected retirements in the Milton Public Schools. That would yield a savings of approximately $149,000, but we've also identified an additional sped cost related to a day student that now requires a residential program that wasn't identified when the fiscal year 22 request was submitted, as well as now that we've finalized our first round of kindergarten enrollment, there is a large number incoming class of students that will require some additional aid support at the kindergarten level. So the net overall of those items is approximately a $17,000 shortfall.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Fahey, I see your hand up. Is that satisfactory?
Well, I guess I appreciate the answer. I probably need to get into a level of detail that we're not able to get into in town meeting, Mr. Moderator. But it just strikes me as the type of management of a budget that when funds become available, that we find another area to, to create another expenditure. And I appreciate everything Mr. Jett said in his presentation. And I think all of us appreciate the Milton Public School System and what has been provided for our children and all children of the town. But, I guess I hope that the transparency that we've talked of, can be there so all town meeting members can be satisfied with what we're voting to approve, or what we're asked to vote to approve in these articles. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Understood. Thank you, sir. I see two hands up, Ms. Wells and Ms. Sheridan. Ms. Wells, you're recognized.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have two questions actually. The first one is, I understand that the pension costs and the medical insurance costs, they're not included in this $54 million figure. Is that correct? And
That is correct. It is.
Can anybody provide us with those figures that are related to the school department? And then my second question, I can ask that after I get an answer to this one, if that's okay.
Okay. Let's see. Mr. Dennehy, or do you have the split on that? Because that comes from a school, or rather a town budget rather than a school budget per se. Or Ms. Collins.
Mr. Moderator, thank you. Mike Dennehy, Town Administrator. Historically, we have used the shared expenses. If you look at the pure budget and take out things like general insurance and group insurance, it appears that it's a 50-50 split between the town and schools. When you take a look at, obviously our schools are our largest buildings in town, and you take a look at the amount of school employees that take advantage of the health insurance benefit, the budget actually breaks down to about 65-35. So if you look at Article 5 from a week ago tonight, that's the breakdown. So the $520,000 that's allocated to schools out of the stabilization fund is that 65%. We could get you actual numbers. I could have HR Director Eppolito run those numbers. But historically, with the shared expense, had the shared expense not been shared, but decentralized, you would see schools make up about 65% of the town's budget. And that includes general insurance as well.
Mr. Dennehy, did you mean Article 5 or perhaps Article 8, where we have retirement and insurance?
No, I was referring to the stabilization number. So,
okay, representative.
Yeah. When we went to take money out of the stabilization fund, we did a 65-35 split. Historically, that's been the breakdown of the town.
Understand. It's just representative of the percentages. Thank you.
Correct. If the larger health insurance or general and group insurance or general insurance were decentralized.
Okay. Thank you.
And the pension, the pension number does he have that number also?
Mr. Dennehy, do you have a pension split?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mike Dennehy, Town Administrator. I do not have that at my disposal, what the breakdown is.
Ms. Dexter, I saw your hand literally raised. Do you have a split on pension?
The pension appropriation included in that article does not include anything for teachers. That comes through the cherry sheet and is included in the non-appropriated expenditures on the expenditure cover page inside the warrant. I don't have the actual dollar figure with me, but the employee benefits appropriation article does not include teachers' retirement. I do not have a split on the group insurance either. That is on the town side.
Yeah, I guess in the future, as a town meeting member, I would really like a breakdown so that we really know in total what the school department total number is. My second question has to do with a comment that was made, and I agreed with Mr. Jett, that collaboration with the town on any kind of savings is totally appropriate and recommended. And I have heard that the town recently implemented a new policy or strategy where they're saving the town a considerable amount of money by offering a bonus to town employees who waive their rights to the medical insurance. They get a certain amount of money as a bonus, and instead they go under their spouse's plan. And that has saved us a good amount of money per each employee who does that. So if we could get some information on that, I don't have any details, unfortunately, but I was wondering if that would be something that the school department could also benefit from, that kind of a waiver system and bonus system, so that we could save a chunk of money for them that could be used to benefit the students.
Thank you. Ms. Collins, I see your hand up at the moment, and then I'll get Mr. Jett. Ms. Collins, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Melinda Collins, Chair of the Select Board Town Meeting Member, Precinct 9. I believe that actually that's available to every employee, so that includes school committee members. But I actually raised my hand for another reason, Mr. Moderator. Last week, the Select Board voted an additional $57,488 to the school committee budget. And we did send it over to the warrant committee, but perhaps with all the emails and details flying around, it didn't get there. So I think it should be in the warrant committee clerk's email box, another copy. Oh, there it is. Thank you very much. So I would like to move to make this change in the appropriation. Thank you.
Yes, I'm sorry. If that came through my paperwork, I missed it. So I didn't read it as the recommendation on the floor. But
well, Mr. Moderator, I'm not sure actually that it actually made its way all the way through after we voted. So thank you.
Okay, then let me just confirm, Mr. Asher, are you? I'll get to Mr. Jett in a second. Mr. Asher, are you on the line? Mr. Asher of the warrant committee?
Mr. Moderator, the warrant committee is in session talking about this. We'll be back to you shortly.
Can I ask a question before you do?
Oh, go ahead.
Did the warrant committee vote to accept this additional money prior to town meeting tonight?
We did not. We did not have the occasion to do it. We're doing that as you speak.
Okay, thank you.
So hang on and just ask everybody to keep their shirts on. Will
do. Keep my shirt buttoned and on. Let me go back now to, let's see, Ms. Collins, you're a town meeting member, I believe, correct? Then you are as the chair of the select board.
Yes,
so you're
Mr.
now
Moderator.
making a motion. If you could perhaps formally make a motion to amend this article with the dollar amount you're stating, and then I'll look for a second from the members in the audience.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move to amend Article 26 with a recommended appropriation for the school department of $54,243,734.
Thank you. I see it's seconded by Mr. Walsh. We have a second. Now, let's see, we were back to a couple things. I'd like to answer Ms. Wells' question. I think, Mr. Jett, you were trying to do that, and then we'll go back to discuss this article, this motion to amend. So, Mr. Jett, can you go back to Ms. Wells' question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator, and I do apologize for not putting my hand down. The question was answered just moments ago. And when we have vacancies, it's very hard to predict because we don't know in advance who we're going to hire and whether or not they're going to select the family plan, the individual plan, or whether or not they would take the incentive. The other thing that I want to mention when we hire, or at least moving forward, when we hire, we're going to try to take the best candidates to be in front of our students. And sometimes there could be a net savings and sometimes there may not be. So I just wanted to make that clear. It's not that every single position that we hire as a novice teacher. Sometimes we're getting teachers who come from other districts and other towns. And I think that's important to note. But thank you very much. And I hope that answered Ella Wells' question.
Well, my question was still, have we implemented it already? And were there any savings for the schools, for the town?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. James Jett again, Superintendent. Yes, the incentive program has been implemented in the Milton Public Schools for a few years now. As long as it's been provided to the town side, it has been on the school side.
Thank you. Ms. Collins, was it your intention to offer that as a friendly amendment to the warrant committee recommendation?
Yes, Mr. Moderator.
If they come back with a positive vote as a friendly, then we can dispense with the vote. So
Thank you.
why don't we let them do that, and then we'll, I see two other hands up, Ms. Sheridan and Ms. Simons. Mr. Dennehy, were you trying to get my attention, or?
Yes.
Yes, yes, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mike Dennehy, Town Administrator. So just to follow up on Ms. Wells's question, all unions in town have this opt-out incentive in their contracts. Over the course of the last year and a half, the town has saved approximately $489,000 in FY21. 16 of the 26 participants are school employees.
Thank you. Ms. Wells has put her hand down, so that sounds like we satisfied her questions. Thank you. We'll just now wait for a vote of the warrant committee. By the way, Ms. Eberhard, would the schools accept this friendly amendment to your budget?
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. Yes, we would accept this friendly amendment.
Thank you. There's a question that came in from one of the members. One of the things we do have to do to increase funds is to specify where they're coming from. So, Ms. Collins, could you specify the source of this additional money?
Mr. Moderator?
Mr. Asher, if you could hang on just a sec.
Yes, of course.
Ms. Collins?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This is a result of the House Ways and Means Committee increasing the town's general government aid.
The Mass State House.
Yes.
Ways and Means. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Asher, this has been offered as a friendly amendment accepted by the school committee. What is the opinion of the warrant committee?
The warrant committee assents and concurs by a fair majority.
Thank you very much.
Thank
with
you.
that, okay, we're now, the motion has been amended as you see on your screens. With that, we'll go to Ms. Sheridan, then Ms. Simons. Ms. Sheridan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Linda Lee Sheridan, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 9. Thank you, Superintendent Jett, for that review of the unprecedented school year we have just lived through, and Assistant Superintendent Dexter for the budget overview. I speak in full support of the school budget article and only wish that the allocation was greater. I served on the Milton School Committee for 9 years, and since I stepped down about 5 years ago, the enrollment has increased by over 500 children to 4,500 students. I want to point out that more than 40 of these children in the Milton Public Schools are children of Milton Academy faculty who reside in housing that is tax exempt. I believe in my core that it is our responsibility to educate all students in Milton. However, $0 in tax revenue is provided from these Milton Academy properties for all the town services that they receive. Currently, 80% of the Milton Academy faculty lives in tax-free housing. At a conservative estimate, should those faculty houses be taxed just like yours and mine, we would have at minimum $400,000 additional funds, which is far less than the Milton Academy's $192,000 recent pilot contribution. The Board of Assessors is currently reviewing this, and I want to thank them for their due diligence in this matter. I believe we should all support a narrowing of eligibility for property tax exemptions in this town. This would be equitable and fair, in my opinion. I think we would all agree that the town of Milton needs a broader tax base to support our town services and our schools. A special thank you to Superintendent Jett and all the Milton Public School staff for the tremendous education you provide our children on these limited budget dollars. And before I close, I would just like to say, since this is the first town meeting that we've had since Superintendent Gormley has stepped down. Oh no, was she there in the fall? I want to thank her again for her leadership. Thank you very much for your time.
I think we had a couple.
Okay, sorry.
So we've had a couple points of order. The first is from Ms. Agostino, asking to review the recommended language as the select board information stated the additional funds are not from the tax levy, which is currently the only source listed. And so Ms. Agostino was pointing out the bold text that's at the bottom. So perhaps I could get a clarification from the select board of when last minute funds come in like this, how is it treated?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. You may want to check with town council, but the article always has this language, and yet every year general government aid is applied across many operational articles.
Thank you. I'll just consult quickly with town council. Another member, Ms. Davis, said the point of order, the prepared statement is out of scope. I think the member was talking about the school budget and source of funds. So I think she was well within her rights to be able to offer her commentary and did so quite briefly. Thank you. So I'll just talk to town council for a minute and be right back. I'd like to recognize Town Council Kevin Freitag. Mr. Freitag, you're recognized.
Moderator Kevin Freitag, Town Council. It's my understanding that in the past, the town has always left the recommendation just as it is, as it appears in the warrant, even if the money has come in later. The money would go into the town's general fund, and any appropriation in this article would come from the tax levy as well as from available general funds. So the recommendation, in my opinion, is fine as is. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, sir. I see one more hand. Ms. Simons, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Rebecca Simons, Precinct 5. I just had a question. Why is the Milton Public School per pupil amount near the bottom of the state when the school budget has increased substantially over the last 8 to 12 years?
Okay, I think I'll go to the chair. Ms. Eberhardt, can you either answer that or point me to someone who can?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Margaret Eberhardt, School Committee Chair and Town Meeting Member Precinct 3. I could ask Assistant Superintendent Dexter to address that issue perhaps, and it might just have to do the amount of the enrollment and the number of students that we have as it pertains to the amounts divided out over that time. But perhaps Ms. Dexter has something she'd like to add.
Ms. Dexter, can you provide an answer?
I don't have an exact answer. I'm sorry. I'm very new to this role, and I could look into it and get back to the person asking the question. I apologize.
Ms. Simons, and I personally did some research on this a few years ago. And when I was looking from town to town, what I found is the answer would come from the organization that calculates the per pupil spending. But I found deltas between whether benefits are in or out, whether pension is in or out, whether consolidated facilities are in or out. For example, our consolidated facilities, the cost of the buildings is not in the school budget. So you'd have to find an apples to apples methodology and then determine how the accumulating authority that publishes those numbers process that methodology, if that helps.
Thank you. That helps.
We'd be happy to get some answers for her as well.
Thank you, Ms. Eberhardt. Okay, I now see two more hands, three more hands, two more. Mr. Mulligan and Ms. Harrington. Mr. Mulligan, you're recognized. If you can go off mute, Mr. Mulligan. You're still on mute, Mr. Mulligan. Okay, I'll assume you're having just a short-term trouble. We'll come back. I'll recognize Ms. Harrington. Ms. Harrington, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Hiss. Nora Harrington, Precinct 3, town meeting member. I just want to comment on the per pupil spending. I mean, isn't it as simply as because we know that there are about 500 more students in our schools over the last 10 years. So that budget is being spread across far many more kids. And of course, the per pupil spending would come down dramatically because we're educating so many kids. And, you know, while I'm saying this, I just really want to commend our administration, our school administration in the schools. As a parent of 2 Glover Elementary kids, you know, I'm astounded at the level of education that our schools are able to provide with such a restricted budget. When we have 1 nurse for 600 kids at Glover, 1 nurse for that same number of kids at Cunningham and Collycott, I mean, our teachers and school personnel are working overtime to educate our kids. And I was very sad to see the article fail on the motion fail on the first night of town meeting. You know, we need these positions in our schools. And I think instead of these questions delving into whether or not we have professionals running our schools, we should be grateful for how much is done with a very limited budget. So I just want to again thank Mr. Jett, thank all of our administration for everything they do to educate the kids in this town. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Mulligan, I see your mic is back.
Yep, sorry about that. Jim Mulligan, Precinct 2. I guess one of the questions I have is I look at the budget numbers from FY20, we're at 51 million. FY22, we're looking at 54.2 million. And I'm wondering just where, does the school committee or does the superintendent really, can they give any idea of where this is all going? Where are we going to be in 2 years? Is that out of scope or is that a allowable question at this point?
I assume they could.
And I apologize. I don't mean to drag on the discussion, but I sit there, I listen to town meeting, and I know people talk about wanting to build a new school, and I look at this and I say, we're not building a new school, and we're up $3 million in 2 years. So I'm just wondering if they have. I mean, we didn't really hear from them sort of like the state of the schools and where do they see things in the future.
I could ask Ms. Eberhardt, ma'am, might you have a little insight for the member?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Margaret Eberhardt, Chair of the Milton School Committee, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3. Thank you, Mr. Mulligan, for your question. It's a very important question, and it's extremely important for us as a school committee and for the district to consider the fiscal burden on the town for the schools. We are working diligently to think about a long-term plan. We have been planning long-term for our space needs, for our technology needs, and for the, and the needs that arose because of the pandemic. And, I'd like to point out that we have had, as Ms. Sheridan pointed out, a large increase of enrollment over the last few years. And for every student that comes along, that is an increase in the budget usually. So we are working with the town closely with the finance subcommittee of the select board and ourselves to think a long-term 5-year plan for the schools in the town with regard to the school budget. and invite any town meeting members and any citizen of the town to join any finance subcommittee meeting, their open meetings, to learn more about the process moving forward for the budget. And I don't know if Superintendent Jett or Assistant Superintendent Dexter would like to add anything to that.
Mr. Jett, do you have some comments? You recognized?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. And once again, thank you for that question. And I do anticipate that the budget will continue to increase with the cost of living going up, but also with the number of 40B projects that are being presented to the town of Milton. And when folks sell their homes, 3-4 bedroom homes, the likelihood of someone moving in with children is increased. And so that does it. We heard a lot of conversation about students because of the pandemic potentially move into private or parochial schools. We're not seeing a rapid decline, or if we are seeing a decline with people moving out, we see an increase of people moving in. In respect to Chair Abahat's conversations, the conversation about the enrollment issue has been significant over the last few years. The school committee in the building, Milton building, school building committee made a proposal, a statement of interest to the Massachusetts Building Association, School Building Association. Unfortunately, just recently it was denied because other school districts in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts are in a more dire situation than we are. But I think it's been eloquently stated that all 4 of our elementary schools are oversubscribed. The Tucker School, built for 400, was hovering around 471. Glover, built for 500, hovering around 620, 625. Cunningham, built for 500, hovering around 671 and 640, somewhere around that age. And if you add all of those up, that's almost the equivalent of 500, which is approximately what our school buildings are built for. And those students, if staying in the Milton Public Schools, matriculate through the grade. So we anticipate that things are going to go up, and some people in class sizes may go up next year. I want to say it now, that is a possibility. And we're currently, I think I said it in my opening statements, I walked the buildings with the director of the facilities, townwide facilities, Bill Ritchie, and the IT director, Bob Patterson. In January, we looked at all of the schools and spaces, and we're looking to convert some additional spaces to accommodate some of our growing enrollment. It is real. These are conversations that have been had for years, and they're well documented on our Milton Public School website under the school committee in some of the meetings. And I would advise people to go to that, because I do know a lot of people thought it was an excuse not to open up the school buildings sooner rather than later when we talked about their enrollment, but it's real. So my hope is that it is a conversation, and I hate to use the term override, but I think that the community in the town should really come together. And if that is something that is on the horizon, we should start that conversation sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jett. Mr. Mulligan, clear?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I just want to say, I support the Milton Public Schools. I have 2 kids in the schools. I guess the one thing maybe they can answer this, it's just as a follow-up. If we were to build a new school, how many more positions would that mean for the school department? Like, what does it take how many people work in the Glover School? I don't actually know.
Mr. Jett, do you think you have that answer to hand? Order of magnitude?
Plus or minus.
I don't have the exact number of teachers, but we are getting into that point. And I know some people have even stated, why don't we split some of the classes? To your point, Mr. Mulligan, if we split the class, we have to have another teacher in the other room. So again, these are the projections that we're talking about in terms of the 40B projects. I don't know specifically how many students are going to come and how many teachers we're going to need. But to your point, it's a point well taken. And once we determine what that looks like, we would definitely communicate that, as we have always done. Well, I should say, as former Superintendent Mary Gormley, Glenn Pavlicek, Dr. Spalding have done in the past 2 years, clearly articulating what the needs are for the district, and we would do that the same.
Thank you.
I see 2 more hands, Ms. Clark and Mr. Walker. Ms. Clark, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jill Clark, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 4. In the warrant, it states that the proposed budget does not include an additional request to fund a couple of other positions, including additional nurses. I was wondering if we could hear a little bit more about what the nursing coverage is currently in the schools and how those nurses have been able to respond to the pandemic in this most unusual year.
Okay. Mr. Jett, is that for you?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and I'll do my best to answer that question. And if I'm off a little bit, I would ask Superintendent Dexter or Spalding to jump in. In having these ongoing conversations with members of the Warrant Committee and some members of the Select Board, we knew coming into this town meeting that the budget was pretty tight and scarce. We're also anticipated to get some ESSA money, some stimulus money that we could use for COVID-related situations. And one of those things would be part-time nurses and try to fund the nurses out of the ESSA money that we were going to get from the state. And that will be part-time with the understanding we know that that's not sustainable. And that is why I continue to say, or will continue to say, looking at the budget, if it's not any additional revenue coming in, then we may need to talk about what it looks like in terms of an override. I think it's been clearly stated, and we've been very blessed that nothing has happened in previous years to the level where it was detrimental to an individual or a family member. But we are at bare bones in terms of our nursing staff, but we're looking forward to trying to support that with some of our stimulus money.
Thank you. Next, I see Mr. Walker is the last hand up. Mr. Walker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Leroy Walker, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 10. I think that anyone and everyone should be supporters of making sure that we have the best quality schools possible. Obviously, if you have students in the Milton Public Schools, that's a vested interest. And if you're a homeowner, even if you don't have children in school, the fact that Milton Public Schools are viewed as one of the best school systems in the state is beneficial for upholding those property interests. The answer to Mr. Mulligan's question, though, is what the future holds. Well, it is unlikely that this enrollment issue that we're facing is going to go away. It's only going to be exacerbated with the amount of development that's going on in town, 40B and otherwise. So we can assume that particularly at the elementary level, the enrollment is going to continue to increase. That means we probably will have to build a new elementary school. And with regard to what the cost would be, looked at, and this, I think some of this information is on the town website and the school budget, but Mr. Mulligan, if you look at the staffing at the Tucker and the staffing at the Collycott, that's kind of the range. So that'll give you some idea of what the number of teachers might be. But the two issues that are the elephants in the room here are salaries, salary growth, and salary and wage growth, and benefits cost growth. And until we figure out how to address those issues, and for town meeting members, I would caution you that this is an issue where you can't have it both ways. If you want to address wage growth, then we're going to have to get the cooperation of the unions. And when the unions start to complain and say, well, they're taking this away and they're taking that away, we can't have it both ways. And this is difficult for elected officials to say, but we can't have it both ways. So either we want to get these school costs under control so that we can make sure that we're not diminishing the quality of education, or we don't. But those are the choices. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. At this point, I see no further hands, and I think the members have said what needs to be said. Pardon me, someone's trying to get my attention. Just a minute. Sorry, Ms. Collins, I missed you. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Melinda Collins, Chair of the Select Board, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 9. I did want to piggyback on Superintendent Jett's comment about ESSER funds today guidance came out from the federal government on the American Rescue Plan Act, and there should be funds for the school, not just for schools, not just for nurses, but in reading the guidance very quickly, there should be other resources as far as mental health and other things that are very important in coping with COVID. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. With that, we'll proceed to the vote. This requires a majority vote. If we could put up the poll. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. If we could unmute the phones. On the phones, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
Thank you. We can mute. And we can display the results. So I calculate the motion carries with 195 yeses at 88%, 26 noes at 11%, and 2 abstentions at 1%. With that, we will proceed on to future articles. So 27 was passed by the consent agenda. 28 was passed by the consent agenda. 29 passed by consent. 30 was passed by consent. 31 was passed by consent, as was 32 and 33. So that takes us to 34, which was excluded from the consent. So I'll just read the article and the recommendation. To see what sum of money the town will appropriate to the Affordable Housing Trust. This is on page 56, by the way. The Affordable Housing Trust to determine how said appropriation shall be raised and to act on anything related thereto, submitted by the Select Board. Recommended that no appropriation be made under this article. Does anyone wish to speak to this article and motion? And I see Mr. Callahan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. 1 second. My name is Tom Callahan from Precinct 4. I'm a member of the Milton Affordable Housing Trust. It is understandable that in this most extraordinary year, there is no appropriation for the trust. I asked to remove Article 34 from the consent agenda so that we can update town meeting members about 2 upcoming opportunities for the trust. As we all know, Milton has a pressing need for more affordable housing in town, for young families who want to rent or buy in Milton, and for our seniors. Voters overwhelmingly supported the passage of the Community Preservation Act in November. And this summer, we will begin collecting that surcharge. And next year, we'll receive our first state matching dollars. For many communities, the main source of revenue for the Municipal Housing Trust is an annual award from the town's Community Preservation Committee. We have an opportunity for a significant annual appropriation to the Housing Trust from the CPC once it is established and begins to award funds. I look forward to town meeting approving future appropriations from the CPC to the Affordable Housing Trust in future town meetings. Another opportunity is before us as well. As many members know, a number of years ago, members of the Governor Stoughton Trust sold Town Farm for $5 million to Pulte Homes to construct what is now known as Milton Woods. The proceeds are controlled by the Governor Stoughton trustees, which are the members of the Select Board, for the benefit of the town's poor. The $5 million has grown to approximately $5.6 million since the sale. The Affordable Housing Trust has requested an initial appropriation of half of the proceeds of the sale of Town Farm so that we can create affordable opportunities in perpetuity for town residents. The trust looks forward to working with the Governor Stoughton trustees to move forward on this request in the coming year. And finally, a bit of good news. I'm pleased to report that the 2 new affordable condominiums on Church Street in East Milton were just sold to income-eligible first-time homebuyers as a result of the obligations of Pulte to provide 2 affordable homes in Milton. Julie Kramer, chair of the Affordable Housing Trust, and other members of the trust and the Housing Committee engaged with Pulte and the state's Department of Housing Community Development to ensure that those condos were renovated to standards appropriate for resale to first-time homebuyers. We are currently working with the developer of Walcott Woods to ensure that 6 more affordable units will be created in Milton in the coming year or 2. And of course, we will monitor the sale of the 4 affordable homes at the Hendry's building through an affordable homeownership lottery that will be upcoming. I thank you, Mr. Moderator, for the opportunity to update town meeting members on the activities of the trust and some of the pressing needs of affordable housing in Milton. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. With that, I see no other hands raised, so we'll proceed to, I'm sorry, we have Ms. Collins. Sorry, I'm missing your hand, Ms. Collins, but you have faithful aides in here waving me down. So Ms. Collins, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I did want to note that the Governor Stoughton Trust has talked to the Attorney General's office about the request to provide funds directly to the Affordable Housing Trust from the Governor Stoughton Trust. And we have been told that it does not meet the terms of the will. So at the moment anyway, that is not something that we're able to do. Our board also looks forward to the CPC coming online and also notes the sale of Pulte Homes. But again, the Governor Stoughton Trust is not able to fund the Affordable Housing Trust. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for that clarification. With that, we will proceed to the vote. This requires a majority vote. If we could put up the poll. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. If we could unmute the phones. On the phones, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
Thank you. We can mute. And display the results. I declare a majority vote with 186 yeses at 85%, 30 noes at 13%, and 3 abstentions at 1%. We can take down the polls. Article 35 then was passed by the consent agenda. That was the last of the consent articles in the agenda. We'll now proceed on 36 through 48. Just one note, ladies and gentlemen, regarding timing. I have an unavoidable conflict tomorrow night that I'm unable to escape. And so in anticipation of that, our process would call for the election of an associate moderator who serves in the elected moderator's stead. In order to perhaps expedite that, I've asked former town moderator Brian Walsh if he might be willing to accept that role tomorrow night, should his name be nominated and voted upon and approved by the town meeting members. I need no motion tonight. There's still a chance we can get this done in 2 hours. I've gone through all the procedures with Mr. Walsh. He was a moderator for 14 years preceding me, so he's well aware of town meeting time and town tradition. And we've got a very good team here at the Council on Aging to help manage the Zoom webinar technology. So with that, we will proceed to Article 36. 36, recommended that the town vote to authorize the select board during fiscal year 2022 to accept on behalf of the town any and all easements for any of the following purposes: roads, sidewalks, vehicular and or pedestrian access or passage, drainage and utilities, and to abandon or relocate easements required for any of the foregoing purposes, provided, however, that such authorization shall pertain only to easements accepted, abandoned, or relocated at no cost to the town, and act to anything related thereto. This was submitted by the select board, requires a 2/3 vote. Does anyone wish to speak to this motion? I see no hands raised. So with that, we'll proceed to the vote. Those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. If we could unmute the phones. And they are on the phones. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. We can mute. And put up the results, please. The motion carries with 214 yes votes at 95%, 7 no votes at 3%, and 3 abstentions at 1%. With that, we'll proceed to Article 37. So this is a lengthy article, and unless I see, pardon me, I'm sorry, I do declare a 2/3 vote, by the way, on Article 36. Thank you. On Article 37, lengthy article, unless I see an objection in the Q&A, I'll waive the reading of Article 37. Seeing none, I think I will just recognize the select board to, it was submitted by them to briefly describe their intent. So Ms. Collins, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. At the May 2015 annual town meeting, at the request of the Select Board and the Town Government Study Committee, which has since dissolved, town meeting passed Article 15, by which it authorized the Select Board to file with the state legislature a home rule petition relating to the role and responsibilities of the town administrator. The proposed special legislation was intended to strengthen the day-to-day management role of the town administrator. On March 31st, 2016, Governor Baker signed into law Chapter 65 of the Acts of 2016, an act relative to the town administrator in the town of Milton. During the legislative process, the legislature made several minor changes, which is not uncommon. However, those changes resulted in unintentionally narrowing the hiring authority of the town administrator. So as presently written, the legislation authorizes the town administrator to hire and supervise department heads, but not the employees who report to those department heads. The legislature's revision unintentionally changed the meaning of that section to D. Now, it's important to remember that the consolidated facilities director is hired by both the school committee and the select board. So that does not apply to the consolidated facilities director. Other changes are in the nature of clarification or updating the name of the select board. For example, in section 2L, the article clarifies that the town administrator's authority to rent town facilities or real property, extends only to short-term use or rental. Longer-term leases, such as 10-year leases of something like the former East Milton Library building, for example, should be written or should be within the jurisdiction of the select board so that we can conduct a more transparent public process. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, ma'am. I see 2 hands up, Mr. Walker and Mr. Dealey. Mr. Walker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Leroy Walker, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 10. Mr. Moderator, if you could just have Ms. Collins talk specifically about 2D, Section 2D, and specify what in the language that the legislature approved was the problem and what this proposed language changes and resolves. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Ms. Collins, could you explain?
Yes. So in 2D, originally it read, excuse me, something's covering my, originally it said, provided that the quote, town administrator appoint, comma, supervise and direct all department heads, parens open, except for the consolidated facilities director, close parens, as well as town employees, in each case who are under the jurisdiction of the Board of Selectmen. So, but that was, the parens were taken out and a comma moved so that it ended up reading that it was just the department heads. So the language now is changed slightly so that there aren't parens. And if you'll bear with me for one moment, need to get to the highlighted section. Now it reads, all department heads, comma, except for the consolidated facilities director, comma, and town employees who are under the jurisdiction of the select board, period.
Just one follow on, Mr. Moderator.
Yes, please.
Is it the intent of the select board that the town administrator would then be able to overrule department heads and their supervision of their own employees?
Ms. Collins?
I don't think that I would characterize it as overrule, but I think that it's important for the board feels that it's important for, and actually we could look back. I wish I had actually the original report from the Town Government Study Committee, but that it's the intention that the town administrator be able to make those appointments and terminations if necessary.
Any clarification, Mr. Walker?
No, I think I was part of the Town Government Study Committee that actually drafted the language, but I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Neely, you're recognized.
Mr. Moderator, Rick Neely, Town Meeting Member Precinct 3 and retired chairperson of the Sunset Town Government Study Committee. I did get a chance to review this, and I do find that this change is in support of what the Town Government Study Committee originally recommended. This was the intent for the town administrator to have these responsibilities, and it's consistent with what was really presented to town meeting and approved by town meeting back in 2015. So I support the article. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no other hands. So with that, except Ms. Collins, you're recognized.
Mr. Moderator, I wanted to clarify that the select board also is in favor of this, as the board at the time did a lot of the original drafting. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we will proceed to a vote. This, I believe, requires a majority vote. I'm looking at town council to confirm, and he confirms. So we can put up the poll. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. If we could unmute the phones. On the phones, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. We can mute. And close the poll and put the results up, please. The motion carries with a majority vote of 197 yeses at 89%, 21 noes at 10%, and 4 abstentions at 2%. Article 38 was passed last week on Tuesday night. We'll proceed to Article 39. Again, unless I see an objection in the Q&A, I'll waive the reading. This article was submitted by the Board of Assessors. I'd like to briefly recognize Mr. Bill Bennett, who's the new chair of the Board of Assessors. Mr. Bennett, are you there?
Yes, I am, Mr. Moderator.
You're recognized, sir.
Bill Bennett, Town Meeting Member Precinct 6, Chair of the Board of Assessors. So this article was brought to us by a resident of the town in order to increase the income levels for seniors in order to apply for a tax deferral on their property taxes. The limit was $56,000. This will raise the limit to $92,000, which should allow many, many more of our seniors to stay in their homes and defer their taxes until they sell their property at a future date down the road. At present, only 5 residents of the town participate in the tax deferral program. So hopefully this will pass and it'll be a great benefit to our seniors. The Council on Aging is behind these 2 articles that are up. So hopefully we can move forward and help out our seniors. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone wish to speak to this article? Seeing none, we can proceed to the vote. We can put up the poll. This requires a majority vote. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. Are the phones unmuted? Yes, they are. In favor on the phone, please signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, no. We can mute. And display the full results, please. The majority carries with 200 yeses at 89%, 23 noes at 10%, and 1 abstain at 0%. With that, we'll proceed to Article 40. Recommended that the town vote pursuant to Chapter 59, Section 5, Clause 41A of the Mass General Laws, as amended by Chapter 136, Section 1 of the Acts and Resolves of 2005, to set an interest rate of 4% per annum to the payment of real estate taxes upon the sale or transfer of real property, which real estate taxes have been deferred pursuant to the tax deferral and recovery agreement between the Milton Board of Assessors and the owner of the subject property. I'd also like to recognize Mr. Bennett again of the Board of Assessors. Sir, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Again, Bill Bennett, Town Meeting Precinct 6, Chair of the Board of Assessors. So basically, this will just bring the interest rate more in line with what today's mortgage rates are across the board. It again was at 8%. I think we all know that our interest rates for mortgages are now below 4% and 3%. So in conjunction with our discussions with the board, select board, we felt that 4% was a pretty reasonable percent to use for this article. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. I see 2 members wishing to speak, Mr. Ebong and Mr. Fundling. Mr. Ebong, you're recognized.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, sir.
Aqua Ebong, Precinct 4. I'd like to understand if we reduce the rate now, when the interest rate goes up, will we also increase the rate? And given the fact that this is a deferral, are we taking into consideration the compounding of the rates over time, given that these folks may stay in their house for a very long time before the town receives this money? To me, we're not comparing apples to apples here. If the assessor can speak to that, I would really appreciate it.
Yes, Mr. Bennett, can you answer that question for the member?
Sure. So any senior who participates in the program must reapply every year. So the interest rate would be 4%. In order for the interest rate to go up, it would have to go again back to another article at town meeting. So the interest rate would only go up if interest rates across the board went up and we brought another article back to town meeting. So present, we would hopefully keep this at 4% for the near future and longer.
And Mr. Bennett, the compounding question?
Well, it's an annual thing. So it would be from year to year. They can opt out of it at any time.
For example, is 4% in year 2 assessed on the 4% that was deferred in year 1 with this passage?
Well, it's just simple interest. It's not compounded.
Simple interest. That's his question. Thank you. Is that okay, Mr. Ebong?
Compounded.
Yeah. Thank you. That helps.
Very good. I have Mr. Fundling and Mr. Fay. Mr. Fundling, you're recognized.
Thank you. Jay Fundling, Town Meeting Member Precinct 3. Your last answer sort of clarified things, but sort of confused them more. I was wondering if this was going to be retroactive or when it would go into effect, but you said they have to apply every year, but then you said the interest isn't compounded. So if a senior citizen applies this year and gets it, and let's say rates do go up in the future and they decide not to participate, or for whatever reason they don't participate in the future, what do you mean the interest isn't compounded? And can they apply some years and not other years? I'm sorry, your answer left me more confused than illuminated.
Mr. Bennett of the Board of Assessors, can you elaborate?
Sure. So actually, Mr. Moderator, I'm going to ask Bob Bushway, the Chief Appraiser, to jump in, and he can probably elaborate a little bit more.
Thank you, Mr. Bushway. You're recognized. If you could go off mute.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. Bob Bushway, Chief Appraiser. So this whole program, the reason for these changes is to further incentivize seniors to defer their property taxes. And the taxes are only repaid upon either the passing of the taxpayer or the sale of the property. And it is so the interest is simple interest. It's not compounded year to year on top of each other, and it's only repaid upon when it's not calculated each year. It's only when the taxpayer passes on or sells their property. I hope that answers.
Mr. Fundling, did that do it?
I won't say I understand the process anymore, but for purposes of this article, I'm going to vote for it, so it's good enough.
Very good. I see the last hand up is Mr. Fay. Mr. Fay, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Earl Fay, Precinct 1. I was wondering if the town treasurer has weighed in on this in any way. That's not quite related, but there is the interest that's carried on late taxes. I do support lowering this to 4%. I don't know if there's been any consideration from the town treasurer to be considering that as well. There are struggling homeowners out there in the pandemic. Luckily, we're employed, but there might be others who are not and may be struggling at the higher interest rate. And if that's a town-wide discussion in terms of lowering interest rates. Thank you.
I just want to make sure I'm clear. Was your question whether the town treasurer has been consulted on this article or on rates in general for other payments?
Well, both actually, but particularly on this article. And is there any relationship between interest rates charged with respect to the real estate, whether it's deferred or whether it's overdue?
Very good. Mr. McCall, I see your hand is up. Could you answer the question, please?
Yeah, they're two different things altogether. Interest rates that are set on the tax bills are set by Mass General Law. This is set by the town. And when somebody sells the property, moves on, passes away, I have to do the calculation on that. So I take the property taxes for the previous years, and it's a calculation, and I do it month by month by month. And that's how we come to the figure. So it's not on the clock. It's not like the interest rates on the tax bill that is calculated by the system. This is calculated off the books.
Okay, thank you, sir. I see no further hands, unless Mr. Fay, I see you're still unmuted. Did you have a follow-up? You do, you don't?
No.
Nope, okay. Then those are all the speakers. So with that, we can proceed to the vote. We can put up the poll. All those in favor of the motion, by the way, this is a majority vote. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. If we can unmute the phones, they are. And on the phones, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, no. We can mute. If we can close the poll and display the results. The motion carries with a majority vote of 216 yes votes at 93%, 16 no votes at 7%, and no abstentions. With that, we will proceed to Article 41. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a slight change from your warrant. You will notice in the warrant on page 75, there's a lengthy recommendation that was printed in the warrant, recommended by the warrant committee. However, since that printing, the warrant committee received a request from the planning board for a change. The warrant committee at that time was not in favor of that. So the warrant committee took a new vote, which we, for the new members, we refer to as a green sheet, since typically when we're in the high school on town meeting floor, we print them on green paper to distinguish them from other things. And you can then tell it's a new approved vote by the warrant committee. So we're putting up that green sheet vote, which is the new recommendation on the floor from the warrant committee that supersedes what is printed in your warrant. And it's a fairly short recommendation. It just says recommended that the town vote to refer this article back to the planning board for further study. That is just a majority vote. So I'll recognize Mr. Asher to start. Mr. Asher, could you explain this chain of events, please?
Mr. Moderator, George Asher, Town Meeting Member Precinct 6, Chair of the Warrant Committee. The change came to the Warrant Committee really after the warrant was printed. The presentation to us was truncated because of the timing of the warrant and the proximity to the annual meeting. And we did not feel that we had significant or sufficient input to assent to the changes that were recommended for particularly for the consideration of the trees. And the Warrant Committee felt that the Planning Board needed to further explain this to us and to the town meeting, and to think through the issues of that they were raising that we needed to consider in some more detail that time did not permit, very simply.
Thank you. Now, with that, I believe the chair of the planning board wishes to be recognized to discuss, further elaborate. So Ms. Swenson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Moderator Hiss. Denny Swenson, Planning Board Chair, Town Meeting Member Precinct 5. First, though, the Planning Board would like to thank April Anderson for her tremendous service to our town as a Planning Board member and Chair, and for her service on the Capital Planning Committee. We'd also like to welcome new Planning Board member Meredith Hall. Thank you, Meredith, for your service too. Section 4A of the zoning bylaws is the earth materials removal and deposit of fill section. We fondly refer to this as our tree bylaw because we spent a great deal of time thinking of ways to add tree protections to this bylaw. So this Article 41 has been a personal crusade of mine, and my fellow planning board members, past and present, have fully and actively embraced this effort, and for good reason. Trees have been unnecessarily clear-cut, damaged, and killed during construction, leading to stormwater system issues, flooding, fallen trees, and so on. If you can save a tree through clear communication beforehand, it is always easier than trying to remedy a situation through replacement efforts afterward. The amendments we're proposing will help remedy the situations we have been faced with as a town and on our boards. As a board, we decided we wanted to get these rules of the road down for applicants and citizens to be aware of. We've gone throughout our planning board rules and regulations and made an effort to be consistent in our new language with the Conservation Commission guidelines as well. Updating this bylaw that the Zoning Board of Appeals uses is a part of this broader effort of consistency across all our boards in this town of ours. We're a town that cares about trees, and this effort memorializes best practices and provides our volunteer boards and our citizens with the tools to protect trees. It also provides the awareness and understanding of construction practice impacts on trees. The Planning Board requests that you reject the motion to refer this article back for further study because our town is currently faced with 9 aggressive 40B developments. Construction is active this summer. Many decisions on construction are going to be made this summer on those 40Bs by the Zoning Board of Appeals. They'll also be making other decisions on other construction projects. So we believe having this language available to the zoning board would be helpful to them and to our town and give them needed tools to steer construction in a positive direction. This language has been years in the making, and it has received widespread support. There are 8 amendments that we proposed. Late in the process, we realized that the 8th and final amendment could be better. The improvements we wanted to make at that late date were out of scope. So we would like to strike that last amendment tonight. We'd like to bring back the improved language on that final 8th amendment that we are striking tonight at an upcoming town meeting, so we can finalize that with the best language that is out of scope at this moment. But in the meantime, we wanted to provide the ZBA with the other 7 amendments that will be helpful language that has been universally accepted. I'd like to take a moment to thank the building inspector, the Shade Tree Committee, the Zoning Board of Appeals, the Historic Commission, and the Milton Cemetery for their assistance and continued support of this article. So I urge you to reject the motion to refer this article back to the planning board for further study. If you do reject that motion, we'll present a motion to accept the article as printed in your warrant with the slight modification of simply deleting the 8th bullet for this time.
Thank you, Ms. Wenson. Just so everyone knows where we are, we have a motion on the floor to refer this back. And should that motion carry, this article will go back to the planning board. Should the motion fail, what I'll do is I'll entertain a motion from the planning board to adopt approval of Article 41 with the last paragraph removed. We're not voting on that now. We're just voting on the motion to refer back to the planning board or not. Does anyone wish to speak to the motion to refer?
Mr. Moderator, could I possibly acknowledge Cheryl Tagayas, who would like to speak on this, my fellow planning board member?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
And you've done so.
Okay.
With that.
Okay, Cheryl, you're welcome to talk.
Oh, you mean you'd like her to speak?
Oh, yes, she's planning to speak tonight.
Yes, okay. Ms. Tagayas, you're recognized.
Thank you, moderator, and thank you, Denny. I just would like to add a couple of comments. These changes are rather simple in this bylaw. Currently, applicants are not required to show existing trees when they submit their plans, existing condition surveys. This is a really important tool for us on the planning board when we look at special permits. So the first set of bullet points are simply adding a requirement that when there's a removal of earth proposed, that the survey must include the existing treescape of a certain. The same thing would apply when fill is being brought in. And then lastly, when the board is considering its decisions, it must then consider any unnecessary removal of existing trees. And the reason that these are really important is on many projects, we've seen clear cutting of sites where no existing trees remain and then new construction is gone in. When that happens, it not only impacts the trees on that property, but it impacts the trees on the adjacent property. And it removes buffers to adjacent properties that are significant buffers in that treescape. And so we really do think this is important. We've seen a number of projects where we really regret the loss of trees, and we continue to review projects. Having 2 opportunities per year to revise our zoning is limited. And so we really feel as if these particular provisions are important to move forward with at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no, I see Mr. Walker, but Ms. Collins, your hand was up. Do you have something to add, Ms. Collins of the Select Board?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, thank you. The Select Board would like to support the Planning Board and would not like to refer this back to the Planning Board for further study. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Mr. Walker, Mr. Matthews. Mr. Walker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Leroy Walker, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 10. Ms. Collins' comments help to address my question, but could you just have the warrant committee clarify? Did they feel this article was flawed, or did they just not have time to consider it?
Mr. Asher, can you answer the member's question, please?
I'm sorry, Mr. Moderator, could he repeat the question? We were having a warrant committee conversation at the same time.
Mr. Walker?
Did the warrant committee feel that this article was flawed, or did you just not have enough time to consider it?
We felt that there was, to answer the question directly, there was a concern among the warrant committee members that the article addressed the footprint of the house that might be placed or the building that might be placed on a particular lot without looking at the entire lot itself. And examples were made of houses that had been put up on forested areas, which were effectively clear cut, and of course trees put in that were knee high and didn't necessarily need to come down. And the second concept that we considered was there didn't seem to be any provision for penalties should trees be destroyed needlessly, which was a component of this that we felt should have been included, could be included. And to have that conversation was just not possible because of the time with which this was introduced and which we had to consider. So it was a combination of both. But the warrant committee did consider it. We talked about it at great length. And our consideration was that while the planning board did an enormous amount of work, which we respect very much, there was a concern among the members that there was really not enough teeth in the penalty possibility for developers who chose to circumvent the language.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. I see two more hands, Mr. Mullen and Ms. Clark.
I think that did the trick.
George, you're on, you need to mute.
And George, extremely well said.
Muted? Thank you. Okay, Mr. Mullen, if you could unmute.
Peter Mullen, Precinct 2. I wonder if somebody on the planning board could refer to the warrant and the page and direct us to the language in the recommendation that they plan to move to remove from the recommendation.
Yes, Ms. Swenson, could you answer that question for the member, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Okay, so on page 75, where it says underneath recommended, there are 8 bullet points. The very last one, where it says the term so long as the grade of the surrounding land is not substantially altered. A substantial change of grade is a change which would make survival of existing trees unlikely, or which requires the use of retaining walls after the word issued in first sentence of subsection 5A. So we're just striking that final bullet point, and we would like to replace that later with some more detailed language that is at this moment out of scope.
Clear, Mr. Mullen?
And to see it in context, we go to page 79, and it says 10E, but there's a remuneration issue that we have to fix. There was a formatting issue in the printing of the warrant. So it says 10E, but we're going to fix that to be 10A. It would actually number 10, the last sentence of number 10 before you get to A. We're just going to strike that language. We were thinking of adding that language, but now we would like to strike it. It's our own language. And we would like to come back with other language. So we're basically leaving that paragraph alone as it has stood for as long as the bylaw has been in existence. And we're just going to cross out our proposed amendment, and we will come back with new language at a later time.
Is that clear, Mr. Mullen?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. As I understand the question before the body right now is whether to refer this article back to the planning board or to consider the article as it was submitted and as the recommendation that's printed in our warrant. At the end of the comment in the warrant, it indicates that this recommended language has the support of the planning board, the zoning board of appeals, the building inspector, the shade tree committee, and the cemetery. I'd be interested to know if any of those groups or any of those people have any different view if we just strike from the recommendation this one term. It seems to me like it's a minor change, and that I don't understand why they wouldn't continue to support it, particularly the warrant committee.
We actually,
Ms. Swenson, just a sec. If Mr. Mullen, do you need to know that now based on your vote to refer, or is that something we can take up?
I'd like to know it now for my vote on whether to refer or not.
Okay, Ms. Swenson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And thank you for your question, Mr. Mullen. We have discussed the potential language that would be improved, and it was to be improved for the the building inspector in his capacity as code enforcement officer. We thought we could have better language for his enforcement efforts. So we're actually adjusting this to make it better for him.
Mr. Mullen, we okay?
Yes, I'm fine. I would urge the body to vote no on recommending it back, and let's adopt this thing.
Thank you. I see 3 hands up. Ms. Clark, Mr. Fundling, Ms. Gankarski. Ms. Clark, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jill Clark, Town Meeting Member Precinct 4. Earlier, I think it was Ms. Swenson that said that part of the intent of the original change was to discourage the inappropriate removal of trees. And I'm wondering how and by whom inappropriate is defined in this case.
Ms. Swenson, I think that's for you. Ms. Swenson, you there?
Here I am. Sorry about that. So we are adding language, and that was approved by the Zoning Board of Appeals as well, to sort of define what's appropriate and what's not. So we are looking at, you know, getting the trees on the plans, so that and documenting where they are. Calipers of 3 or more inches shall be shown on the plans. And then, as Cheryl was describing, when you pull earth out or dirt out, you consider the trees, and when you put dirt in, you consider the trees. And then we described reasonable conditions to prevent the unnecessary removal of trees, and replacement of trees. And then there was just a little bit of housekeeping in the very end.
Sorry, I think it was that word unnecessary.
Okay, I'm not sure where you're seeing that. Is it in the?
Ma'am, do you mean in her statement or in the article? Ms. Clark.
Jill Clark, Town Meeting Member Precinct 4. In her statement, she said the unnecessary removal of trees. I'm wondering how that's determined.
Okay, so generally speaking, a lot of developers, it's easier for them to remove trees and replace with, you know, ornamental trees later. But through all of these practices that we're looking at, we're trying to steer developers toward thinking about keeping trees where they can. Obviously, there are places where you can't, where you need to put stormwater systems in or foundations in or et cetera. But along the buffers and along other areas, trees serve a purpose in our town, and they keep our, you know, our heating bills, you know, down, and our air conditioning bills down. And they, when you clear cut or you take out trees, they impact our storm water systems. And they, you know, if you look at various construction sites, if you work with the trees and you're thoughtful about them, the site benefits in the long term, and the abutting properties benefit in the long term. And we're basically a tree-friendly town, so we want to try to be as thoughtful as we can. So that was our goal in this effort across all of our, you know, rules and regulations and in this zoning bylaw.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Clark? was two tries at it.
I'll go with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. A number of hands have raised. Mr. Fundling, you're recognized.
Thank you. Jay Fundling, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3. We've heard a lot in this town meeting over the past week about respecting the process and the experts behind it. This is a subject that I am not an expert on, and I suspect most town meeting members are not. But the planning board has put forth a well-researched change, and I defer to their expertise. And so I support the planning board. I will be voting no on the motion to send it back, and then I will look forward to supporting the motion from the planning board. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, Ms. Gankarski, then we have Ms. King, Tagayas, Ebong, and Agostino. Ms. Gankarski, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Point of clarification to Ms. Swenson. If we do not pass this article as written tonight, it is my understanding that leaves us here in the town of Milton with no protection for the next year for a developer to come in and do clean cutting of trees on a piece of property that is being developed. Is that in fact true?
Thank you for your question. So all of our boards do everything we can to prevent the kind of clear cutting that is damaging. But if this bylaw is turned down by town meeting, I'm afraid we will be stuck in the position that we have been in for years, where from time to time, inadvertently, we do see tree destruction, and it usually happens around construction, and it usually happens around new projects, but it can happen around, people doing some renovations and things like that, but it's usually in the new projects. So we do have good reason to try to move this along, because we do have a lot of projects and new projects coming through our zoning board this summer. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, sometimes I need to see it in very simple ways. So I tonight will be voting not to refer this back to the planning board, but to be voting for it to pass as written. Thank you for your explanation.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
We'll go to Mr. Ebong. Mr. Ebong, you're recognized.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Aqua Ebong, Precinct 4. I have a little concerned about the discussion so far. It sounds like we're assuming that developers intentionally destroy trees. I wonder if anybody in that industry sees things that way. I also wonder if this is really a problem as large as explained, or we're proposing a solution in search for a problem. Also, I'd like to know, did we consider the financial impact, intended or not intended, as we pass this law? Will neighbors now have to get approval to trim trees within their neighborhood or within their property that may pose dangers to their house? And if in the process of waiting to get approval, the tree falls on the house, who's responsible? Who will be liable? Have we really thought this through? Would taking more time to think this through really have a negative impact on the system? It sounds like we're just trying to pass a law that is targeted at some specific person that may have unintended consequence in the future. If anybody can respond to some of those comments, I would really appreciate it.
I'll recognize Ms. Swenson. Perhaps you can, I got a couple of them down, but go ahead.
Oh, sure. Thank you for writing them down, because there were a couple there. This bylaw only applies for the Zoning Board of Appeals when an applicant comes before them on a new project that involves moving earth material or replacing or replenishing earth material. So this doesn't affect, your average homeowner unless they're building a brand new home or homes.
He also asked about dollar impact.
Well, we've been working with the enforcement officer it's not going to really change, his workload in any way. If we adjust that 8th bullet point like we have described. So this is not going to cost us anything. It's going to provide consistent information about best practices for our construction people to use, for our citizens to understand and be aware of, so that they can, request that those best practices be used. So it's really just a benefit. It's a benefit for applicants to understand the rules of the road before projects start. So it's a win-win for everyone, really. And I don't think, all developers want to take down every tree or necessarily do clear cutting. We have a lot of wonderful developers who understand this, but it's also just important to have rules of the road for all developers who may see it easier to remove and replace as opposed to, try to work with some of what's there.
Also, is this a real problem?
Yes, this is a real problem. We've had it on a number of sites. We can share war stories with you at another time, but we've had a lot of significant clear cutting damage. And we've had poor neighbors and neighborhoods who have been dealing with flooding issues, fallen trees, because of when you disrupt the earth too much, and trees die and they're still standing there. And it can be very dangerous. And we've had fallen trees, stormwater issues, flooding, and so on. And I've been on the planning board for 4 years, and a number of times a year we've had issues arise that we're hoping to avoid with this sort of language.
And Mr. Rebong, your point about tree falling on the house, did her answer about this applying to new development answer that question for you?
Yes, it did. But I think I still had one more question there. But we've said that it has no impact, doesn't cause financial impact on the town, but do we see this increasing the cost of building? And we just talked not too long ago about not having enough buildings in homes in the area. Can we make sure that we're not putting in laws that may unintentionally increase the cost of new homes?
Ms. Swenson?
Generally, best practices don't cost more. There might be a little bit of more time here, but then they don't have the time at the end where they have to plant new trees and wait for the new trees to take, and all the water it takes to get new trees up and running. So I think it probably all evens out. But different contractors may feel a little bit differently about that. But a lot of developers have expressed to me that it ends up costing about the same, and they don't like to take down trees unnecessarily, because of the replacement costs and the years it takes for the new trees to actually take root and become healthy and strong and viable. And it's the larger trees that offer us, CO2 and real benefits to the ecosystem. They also drink, 30% of the water on a site. So that's why we end up having flooding issues when you clear a whole bunch out.
Thank you, Ms. Swenson.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Rebong. I think those are your 2 questions. We're good?
Thank you.
Thank you. In the Q&A, a member has made a motion to move the previous question. By the way, I'll remind the audience what that means per our bylaws is limit members' presentation speaking to 5 minutes, and only a member may speak once during a motion. Is there a second? I see no second. By the way, on this article, I do see a second. Mr. Fay has seconded. This is not debatable, so it requires a 2/3 vote. If we could put up the poll. All those in favor of the motion to move the previous question, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. On the phones, we could unmute. On the phones, pardon me, on the phones. Town clerk, could you do your identification real quick?
Yes, call-in user number 2. Could you identify yourself?
Madam Clerk, are you referring to me, Sean Fallon?
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Fallon. Mr. Fallon, if you drop and return, you come in looking like a new user to us. That's why she's asking the question again. So thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, with that, if we unmute the phones. On the phones, all in favor of the motion to move the question, please signify by saying aye.
I'm sorry. Could
On the and Ms. Swenson, could you mute? So on the phone, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
Thank you. We can close the poll and put up the results. The motion fails at 65% with 145 yeses, 72% no, and 32% no, and 5 abstentions at 2%. So we will carry on. By the way, I've been keeping track. The longest speaker we've had is Ms. Swenson's opening comment at 4 minutes. So the members are being good tonight, so I appreciate that. We'll carry on. If we could close the poll results just off the screen. We're on to Ms. Agostino. Ma'am, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Diane DiTullio Agostino, Precinct 9, and Chair of the Commission on Disability. When I received this warrant this year, I have to admit I was shocked at the number of lengthy zoning articles. It's difficult enough when we're in person and we actually have a handout that specifies what the amendments might be. So one of my questions is, did we receive any of the materials that are being proposed tonight in an email that didn't get through to me? Because here we are virtually hearing a lot of proposed changes. We have a warrant committee that spends a lot of time on these things. However, when it comes to zoning bylaws, we specifically, as a town, decided to add an extra fall town meeting specifically for purposes of looking at zoning bylaws. And I give all the credit in the world to the Planning Board and the Board of Appeals, 2 committees I never even dreamed of being on because of articles such as this that are very complex and you do take a lot of time to review them. But this article, the Warrant Committee has made some very good points, and yet at the same time, it sounds like we kind of just want to push it through. I don't think we all forget the many, many years of debate and argument that held up the construction of the Henry's building, and there was a tree under debate with that issue. So while I support keeping trees on properties, I see that this is very vague. We as town meeting members are not really clear on what we're going to be voting because we don't have it in front of us to have read it prior to hearing about it. There are a lot of words, but I don't see any teeth in it if there's no penalty. So wouldn't it be better to do what the Warrant Committee is saying and make sure that we as town meeting members and developers and residents know exactly what this language is? That was a really good point brought up by someone about how many other boards and committees are involved in this. And yet if there's no penalties, then a developer could still basically do what they want to do. So if we really want to achieve this, we could come back in the fall. This is not something that we have to wait a whole year to do. Let the Warrant Committee, let the Planning Board with their new members review it, iron it out with all the other committees, get the warrant committee, their input, because I think they made some recommendations, if I had heard correctly, and then move forward in the fall with a clean article that we can all support. And I don't believe that that's going to make that big of a difference between now and the fall, because as you work with developers, we certainly can, whether it's the building inspector, the planning board, Board of Appeals, anyone, we can certainly make it known to them. And even if we make it known to them, there's still no penalty. So with the article, there's no penalty. Without the articles, no penalty. So I would strongly urge that we support the warrant committee and request the planning board to go back to the drawing board and make, fine tune it so that we actually have it in writing the way we want to approve it. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. By the way, your question, was there an email you missed? No, there was not. And that's really my decision. I get concerned with the volume of emails and the version control of the documents. So what I've worked out with our town's IT department is to post all the content we get up to the town meeting page as soon as we get it, which includes the written motions to amend, the presentations, green sheets, et cetera. So you should find them all. I've just confirmed with our IT lead right here that this content is there, and hopefully the members can read it. But that's my decision of how to go communicate out to the members, ma'am.
Do you know when that was posted for us by you, or when you received it from the planning board?
I would have, Article 41, I had this content, I think on Friday the 7th. And so I would have sent it off around then to town IT. So around that time would have gone up. Is that satisfactory, ma'am?
Thank you for the reply. I still think, with a virtual town meeting, it's best to go back and do it right and support the warrant committee.
Thank you, ma'am. Yep. Hopefully our last virtual town meeting, and we'll all be going back to school in the fall. Let's see. I see Ms. Hayden Sloan, Mr. Coyle, and Mr. Kelleher. Ms. Hayden Sloan, you're recognized.
Priscilla Hayden Sloan, Precinct 10. I think that this bylaw is an important one. Most of the developers just need to say, we will preserve as many trees as we can, but it's not clear. If they decide they can't preserve them, they take them down. I think many of our Milton neighbors are inadvertently experiencing downhill, particularly water damage from clear cutting for new building. And basements are being flooded, patios are being washed out. People's own plantings are being unearthed by downhill water. And so the urgency to have a bylaw in place to provide guidelines rather than just a best effort to preserve as many trees as we can is really essential. I think it is written in such a way that should it need to be tweaked in the fall, but there are many homes that are already under duress from this condition. And those residents in town are looking to try to get some relief and some recourse because they go before the boards and committees and there's no ability to enforce if someone's best idea is preserve if they can. So I would support this article going forward, and if it needs some amendment in the fall, but it would give relief to homeowners who are currently suffering from this condition. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll go to Mr. Coyle. Mr. Coyle, you're recognized.
Okay, I support the article and I support the planning board and the Board of Appeals. I would have a question here, though, actually two questions. The building inspector or the code enforcement officer, if they are visiting sites and they see some wholesale cross-cutting removal of trees, I would think they would have the authority to stop construction. So that is one way of having some teeth. And second, I got my second quick question here is does this article apply to we have several 40B projects that are in the approval process. I'd like to understand a little bit better are those projects exempt from town ordinances like this one, or do they have to comply?
Thank you, sir. Ms. Swenson, can you answer certainly the 40B, perhaps the teeth on the building inspector, code enforcer?
Yes, Mr. Coyle is right. Enforcement takes place later. This article is in the planning phase. So the earth materials removal and deposit of fill bylaw is about planning. So it's all about the planning. So when they come before the ZBA, they have the plans in front of them. And that's when we're talking about the trees and if you can possibly keep them and how to keep them and what are the best practices in order to keep them where it's reasonable. And so he is right. If there is an enforcement officer, they can address that, later in the process during permitting, and they can stop a project that's happened. We've experienced it a couple of times. So that's the special permit. Now, as far as the 40Bs and other projects that are before the Zoning Board of Appeals, they can refer to this language. They would have this language. I don't know. I mean, it might be a question for Kevin Freitag, but they currently don't have this language. And if they could have this language, it would help them to have the best practices incorporated to be able to refer to it. So it's as much of a learning activity for all of us, but it's another it's another tool in the toolkit for the Zoning Board of Appeals. And if I could, there are some other planning board members, Cheryl Tagayas and Kathleen O'Donnell, who would also like to speak.
Yes, what I've been doing, ma'am, is recognizing you as the chair. And since Ms. Tagayas already spoke and our rules say that someone can speak second as a member after everyone has spoken first, I don't see
Kathleen O'Donnell.
I don't see her hand up unless I'm missing it. So if she puts her hand up, I will recognize her.
Kathleen O'Donnell can speak to the 40B question. She's an attorney in that area. Kathleen, would you be able to?
Ms. O'Donnell, can you give us definitive
Yes,
answer on
Mr.
that?
Moderator. Kathleen O'Donnell, Precinct 7 Town Meeting Member and Planning Board Member. And I can speak to the 40B question. 40B developers submit a list of waivers from town regulations when they submit their application. So I think that a developer would take the view that the ones that have already been filed would not be affected by a new bylaw. I would point out, however, though, that the developer on one of the 40Bs was reminded of a bylaw that he was going to have to comply with, and he said that he couldn't find it on our website. Our zoning bylaws on the website haven't been updated since 2007. So even if we adopted this one, no one would be able to find it. But in fact, going forward, a new development with a new application would have to comply with this bylaw. We have in our letters to the Board of Selectmen that have then gone to Mass Housing and our comment letters to the Zoning Board have provided this information and suggested that the Zoning Board require compliance with the requirements of this bylaw, even though they may not strictly be needed to because of the fact of the timing. But we have made that recommendation in every letter that we have sent to the Zoning Board commenting on the 40B applications presently before the Board of Appeals. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Coyle, get your answer?
Yes, it does. And I can give one example. I think I did an informal survey of some other 40B projects, and there are other towns in the state that have ended up with projects where there was a buffer zone when the project was adjacent to a residential area. And I think the experience of other towns, that's something that should be used by the reviewing authorities, the Board of Appeals in particular, and the Planning Board for its opinions that it provides to the Board of Appeals. I would certainly encourage that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I see we have Mr. Kelleher, Ms. Felton, Mr. Chinman, and then I'll get to, I think, Ms. Tagayas. So, Mr. Kelleher, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Steve Kelleher, Precinct 8. I recommend support of this article as I observed the clear cutting of trees on the Pleasant Street site known as Pine Gardens. I think that Pleasant Street is a good example of a site that needs further guidelines on a construction site. I feel that there needs to be guidelines for all developments that will be happening in the future. I recommend voting no on sending this back to the planning board. I also recommend that in the fall, perhaps we add or we amend this article if there's to add penalties to this for this language. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We'll go to Ms. Felton. You're recognized.
Deborah Felton, town meeting member, precinct 2, and I'm also the executive director at Fuller Village. And anybody just has to come to Fuller. 21 years ago, we worked with the planning board and the conservation commission to maintain the property the way it was. And on 60 acres, we have so many original trees, and that certainly adds to the beauty of the property. I would vote no, not to send this back to the planning board. I think we need to pass this article. We have a lot of development pending in town, and we need to be proactive in at least saving some of the trees on these properties. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, I'm going to recognize Mr. Chinman. Mr. Chinman, we saw your hand up, and I think we inadvertently omitted it, so you're recognized, sir.
Thank you. Michael Chinman, Precinct 2. I want to follow up on Ms. DiTullio Agostino's comments, which superficially, I think, sound very reasonable, that there's a late change and we don't have the green sheet in front of us. And why can't we just do this in the fall after further study? I want to say that I think the confusion that's happening tonight appears to me to have been injected by the warrant committee. This article was approved by the warrant committee as submitted, as printed in the warrant. The planning board wants to change one of 8 bullet items, the 8th one. And they are suggesting that they pull that 8th bullet item back, and they will review that and submit new language for us in the fall, which is exactly what Ms. DiTullio Agostino wants, to have further consideration in the fall. That part will be further considered in the fall after further work by the planning board. With the first 7 bullet points, I find it really hard to believe that the warrant committee's position is so altered when they previously approved this with 8 bullet points, but now they don't want to approve it with 7 bullet points. And if there needs to be the addition in the fall of penalty language, that can happen. But we should approve this article as it will be soon, I hope, proposed by the planning board by a friendly amendment with the 7 bullet points. So I urge a no vote on sending it back to the planning board, and a yes vote when subsequently the planning board makes a friendly amendment, including the 7 bullet points.
Okay, thank you, sir. Just a reminder to the members, as one of the best practices of town meeting is to attempt to refer to fellow members without using their names, just to refer to the prior speaker or my fellow town meeting member. It helps with general and civility. So with this, I see we're at the second round of speakers. So I'm going to assume there are no new speakers that wish to this. All the points have been made. I'm going to go to the second round, which is I'll go to Mr. Gaius, Ms. Agostino, then I'll go to Mr. Asher of the warrant committee, and then we'll go to the vote to refer back. So with that, Ms. Tagayas.
Thank you. Cheryl Tagayas, Precinct 9 Town Meeting Member, Planning Board Member, and Chair of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. I just want to make note that the master plan in many places references the character of Milton. And a lot of times people associate that character with the tree cover that we have in Milton. What we're seeking to do here is to provide a tool to the permit granting authorities to allow them to point to a document that says, yes, they can consider preservation of trees as one of the items that they're looking at when they're approving or not approving or putting conditions on an application. So this is a tool for the boards. It's part of a bylaw that gets triggered when there's a certain amount of fill or cut, so earth being removed. It's not triggered except for those conditions. And the building inspector is the one, the building commissioner is the one who, in a building permit would identify when that needs to happen, and then it gets sent to the Board of Appeal. But this also could be a great tool for the planning board in our subdivision application review, our site plan review, and our special permits. I just wanted to add those additional comments. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll recognize Ms. Agostino.
Diane DeTulio Agostino, Precinct 9, Chair of the Commission on Disability. Just to repeat, and I know we hate to hear ourselves be repeated, but without a penalty, I don't see how we're making a difference. And I personally am very familiar with some construction that did cause problems for neighbors. But if there's no teeth to the article, which is what the warrant committee basically was saying, and that's what they want to work on, then we really should have held off anyways and done the whole article at the same time. The Pleasant Street construction project was quite an eye-opener, but since they're literally removing the entire hill that was there, there would have been no way for any trees to have been retained. It's more in the smaller neighborhood sites that I've seen this an issue. So I totally support the purpose, but I'd also like to inquire of the town moderator, is it now going to be standard that zoning articles are part of our annual town meeting in the spring, or is the whole vote to have a fall town meeting specifically for zoning? I know that must not have any teeth to it, or these articles wouldn't all be in here, but I would like some idea, and if you have to give it to us at a later date, fine. But I'd like some idea so that we can focus, you know, better on these zoning articles. And as someone did mention, if you go to the town site, a lot of the updates aren't even there. And that has to be done. I mean, this is the day and age of technology. If we're going to change our zoning bylaws, we've got to have them available for anyone to see them. So thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, ma'am. To your question on would zoning articles remain in annual town meeting versus in the fall, the town moderator actually has no control, let's say, over the content of the warrant. I could have influence if consulted or if offered. So I think that question I would direct back to Ms. Collins of the Select Board. Ms. Collins, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. There is a fall town meeting and this special town meeting was indeed added partly to address zoning, but also to address budget changes. There has been no prohibition though for putting fall excuse me, to putting planning board articles into, or any other zoning articles into the spring town meeting. So, I don't see us removing zoning from future annual town meetings. We have 2 opportunities to get these done, and it depends upon how each year the planning board's efforts to develop zoning pan out. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Agostino, did you have a follow-up on that? I saw your hand raised.
No, but since you asked, I simply would say it's the same argument that the article doesn't have teeth, and the fact that we were hoping zoning would be handled in the fall. There's no penalty, there's no teeth to it. And as we can see, things go forward, but thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Mr. Furs, I see your hand raised. Do you have something new to offer?
Yes, thank you. Brian Furs, town meeting member, precinct 10, former member and chair of the planning board. As it relates to the town meeting articles being held just in the fall, that's just not realistic. Things come up. You need to deal with things in the time that they come up. We have had 4 town meetings, I believe, during COVID-19 to deal with issues that have arisen. And I think it's important that the town deal with things as they come up. As it relates to this specific article and the fact that there are no penalties to it, I think Ms. Tagayas, or excuse me, the one of the prior speakers that's on the planning board and a former chair of the planning board, spoke to the fact that this is really designed to be a tool for the board to be able to put conditions into permits that the zoning enforcement officer can then enforce. There was a project in our town at 333 Brush Hill Road several years ago, and the board, because it did not have this type of tool, did not put the right guidelines or requirements, excuse me, into the permit that was issued. I was on the board at that time. And as a result, a site that was heavily wooded was clear cut. And neighbors around that site had their yards destroyed, their driveways destroyed, their patios destroyed, their basements destroyed by water runoff, and ancient trees were lost in that project. And that land cannot be returned to the way it was. The board had made a very clear condition that the site not be clear cut, but because there were not specific guidelines for the board to follow, there was enough gray in that permit that was issued to allow the code enforcement officer and the decision makers at the time that work at the staff level to not understand what the conditions were. And the result was a disaster for nature, for the abutters, and candidly for the project as a whole. Both of those units still remain on the market today because of the condition, in some ways because of the condition that that site was left in. So as much as I have found this debate and the presentation of it candidly to be a bit confusing, I can say as a former member of this board that these guidelines are very much needed to protect what the town has from a tree canopy standpoint and a charm standpoint and from a sheer water management standpoint. And I would encourage this town to make what we have today better and continue to improve it with future adjustments if necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, last 2 words. Ms. Swenson is chair of the planning board. Recognize you and then Mr. Asher.
So this is Denny Swenson. So the teeth is that the Board of Appeals can deny the applicant. And we would agree with the former town meeting members that spoke that enforcement is very important. But this article is at the front end, the planning phase of a development. It's about creating the rules of the road. We're also working with the building inspector on language and enforcement in other areas, in other language that we use throughout our town, rules and regulations, bylaws, et cetera. But this article is at the front end.
Thank you, ma'am. And then Mr. Asher, warrant committee opinion on this motion to refer?
Mr. Moderator, George Asher, town meeting member, chair, warrant committee. I'm rising in response to several comments made. One that actually hits the integrity of the warrant committee, and I take specific issue with a comment that was made that we injected confusion into this. Very frankly, the warrant committee deals with multiple issues of highly complex subjects all the time. There have been 4 town meetings, and in each one, the warrant committee has gone out of its way to accommodate the boards that submit them really at a moment's notice. Given the complexity of many of the issues, it's not always easy to come up with the proper recommendation, but we consider as much as we can in really extraordinary depth, given the time that we have to consider in the first place. Secondly, in this particular instance, the change that was brought forward to us on this particular article was done really at the 11th hour. I point no fingers and I ascribe no blame. Things do come up, changes do occur, but the expectation that the warrant committee is at the beck and call, frankly, of individual boards and can really turn on a dime isn't really reasonable under the circumstances. And we came to this decision with the information that we had at hand at the time. In order to come to this decision, much of the information that we've heard today might have been helpful. There just simply was not time to integrate it into our comment. And certainly the warrant had already gone to the printer before we even had this particular modification presented to us by the planning board. So in defense of the warrant committee, we spend incredible hours hearing testimony all the time. Our recommendations are done very thoughtfully, carefully. Those individuals who choose to dial in or listen to our calls, our meetings, or watch them on Milton Access Cable know that we listen carefully to everything that is brought forward to us and come to what we consider to be the best interests of the town from all perspectives, where we integrate all the input from the planning board, from the Conservation Commission, from everyone, and take those points and try to come up with an application that is going to be in the best interest of the town. To refer this back to the planning board may not be convenient, it may not be easy, it may not be what everybody wants, but if the modifications can be made that will satisfy what we consider the best interests of the town, we're happy to consider them in a reasonable amount of time. Obviously, it's the decision of the town meeting to which we defer, but I will frankly defend the integrity of the warrant committee and its ability to come up with a decision given the proper time and given the facts that we have at hand.
Thank you, sir. With that, we'll proceed to the vote. I'll just remind the audience what we're voting on. So we're not voting on the article itself or any of its content. We're merely voting to whether or not to refer this back to the planning board for further study. So a yes vote refers this back to the planning board. A no vote does not. A no vote puts this article back in play in town meeting. It only requires a majority vote. If we could put up the poll. All in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. If we could unmute. On the phones, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
Thank you. We can mute. And close the poll and the results, please. The motion fails with the yeses at 41 votes and 19%, the noes at 175 votes and 81%, and the abstains 2 votes at 1%. So at this point, I'll now, so the motion is refer back has failed by majority, less than majority vote. I'll now recognize Ms. Swenson of the Planning Board. Ms. Swenson, do you have a motion of what to do with this article?
Yes, so the planning board's friendly amendment is to accept the article as printed in your warrant with a slight modification of deleting the 8th bullet point in the list at the top of the article on page 75.
So let's see, you're making a friendly amendment to your own article. I think you probably either ought to get another member to make
oh, okay.
a friendly amendment in your place, or and then we can decide if you accept it.
Oh, okay.
Or you make a member of the planning board who's not a town meeting member.
Oh, okay. Oh, I don't know if we have any. Oh, hold on a second.
Yeah, maybe I'll just clarify for a minute. Town council is just reminding me of some prior discussion we had. So I think what you can do at this point, ma'am, is you don't need a friendly amendment.
Okay.
What you're going to put on the table, if you want this to pass, here's some advice.
Okay.
You
So
would
the
say,
planning board's motion. Okay, so the planning board's motion is to accept the article as printed in your warrant with the slight modification of deleting the 8th bullet point.
That's correct. So I'll make sure that's clear to the audience. So if we go to the
Page
text
75.
on page 75, and you see the actually, you don't look at 75. What you're actually going to look at is 71, because that's the article.
Okay, 71.
Right. So 71 is
underneath
the article. We're
recommendation.
going to ignore that text that was there. So
Okay.
what you're recommending is to adopt Article 41, but strike the 8th bullet point that is on page 71 that starts with the phrase, the term so long as the grade of the surrounding land is not.
That's correct.
Okay. I see a second from Mr. Walsh in our Q&A. So now we have a motion before the body. This is to adopt zoning bylaw. And do we have that text up on the screen? Yes, we do. Ms. Warrant Committee Clerk. And now, does anyone wish to speak to this motion before the body to adopt this as amended zoning bylaw and strike that last 8th bullet point while doing so? I see no hands. I see one hand. I see no hands. Hang on, I just have to speak to town council for just a minute. Just pardon me. Now I see Mr. Gaius' hand is raised. Mr. Gaius, you're recognized.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Cheryl Tagayas, Precinct 9, and member of the Planning Board. I'm trying to have a dialogue with the Planning Board members, but we would also need to strike that same language on page 74 in section 5A, the language that was in the 8th bullet point.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. Let me just make sure I understand what you're saying. So you're on page 74. I think I just got to talk to town council for a second.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Gaius, back to the change you would like to make. Where could you point us to it? You're still on mute, Mr. Gaius.
Thank you. On page 74, paragraph 5A, where if you, the words that were being added in bullet point 8 would need to be struck.
That would be,
so long as the grade of the surrounding land is not substantially altered. A substantial change of grade is a change which would make survival of existing trees unlikely, or which would require the use of retaining walls.
sorry, on 5A. Okay, you are starting with, let's count lines. I'm on page 74, 5A. Let's count lines down in that paragraph. Where does your
okay, so that would be, let's see, 5th line down after the word issued.
So it starts with been issued. So
right after the word issued.
Right. What would you strike? The so long as through the end of the sentence?
Yes.
Understood. So you would put
up until the word walls. Sorry. So it was the words that start with so long as, and then the last word that's stricken is retaining walls.
Understood.
Okay.
Okay. Now, Warrant Committee Clerk is trying to capture this. Let me make sure we have that text here. We're just getting that text up on the screen. Okay. So Mr. Gaius, do you see the text on the screen?
Yes, I see the text on the screen. So like, it's not a red line version. So let's see.
Let me just see if we can perhaps do that. Mr. Geis, you submitted some language in advance on 5A. Does that language read exactly the way you would like the article or this adopted article to read?
Yes, if it's the language that Tim Zawinski, town planner submitted, our director of planning and community development submitted, that would be the correct language.
Okay, so you are also moving to amend section 5A and so that it reads as it reads on the screen.
Correct.
Okay. So let's go back for town meeting members. So you have two, in your motion, you would like to make two changes. On page 71, you're going to strike the first bullet under Article 41 that has the words, the term so long as. That entire bullet would be stricken. And then second, on page 74, you're going to edit 5A so that it appears as it does on the screen that the warrant committee clerk is about to pull up. Okay. Understood. So we have a motion before the body. I'm not sure if I saw a second. Did I see a second from Mr. Walsh before? I think I did. I saw a second from Mr. Walsh. Now let me go back to the audience. So audience, now we're discussing this motion on the body, which is to adopt Article 41 with the two edits as proposed by Ms. Chagayas. I see Mr. Chinman, Ms. Wells. We'll go to Mr. Chinman.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Michael Chinman, Precinct 2. When the warrant committee originally was approving of the article as submitted, their recommendation changed the numbering of the paragraphs. I think by adding 5 to each numbered paragraph. I'm just wondering which one is correct, the as submitted numbering or as recommended by the warrant committee numbering?
I am ignoring the warrant committee recommendation here because that is no longer the motion on the floor.
No, I understand that, but for some reason that recommendation had numbering that added 5 to each number. And I am wondering whether the originally submitted numbering is correct or the addition of 5 to each number is correct.
I'll go back to Ms. Swenson of the planning board. When you wrote this article, the article is printed on pages 71 to 75, numbered correctly. Town council indicates to me, yes, it is.
That numbering is correct. It's the warrant committee. There seemed to be a typo with the warrant committee where it got renumbered. But so Mr. Chairman was right to notice that, but it's the first one is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, I see Ms. Wells, you're recognized.
Yes, hi, thank you. Ella Wells, Precinct 9. I think I have a related question because I thought there was going to be a correction to the alphabetical order on page 79 of section 10. And maybe that's the same as what happened on page 74.
It is, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
So you can ignore the bold text from 75 to 79.
Thank you.
Very good. Next, I see no other hands other than Ms. Swenson of the planning board, and then we'll go to Mr. Asher of the warrant committee for their opinion.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is it my turn or is it? No, I didn't mean to have my hand up.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I see no other members who wish to speak, so we'll go to the warrant committee for their opinion on adopting this motion?
Mr. Moderator, the warrant committee is considering its vote, and we'll be back to you just as soon as we can.
Thank you. Ms. Collins, in the meantime, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The select board wishes to support the changed language.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Collins, I'm assuming your hand is up. I'm assuming you don't need to speak. If you don't, you can just lower it. Thank you. Excuse me a minute, folks.
Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Asher, you're recognized.
Yes, George Asher, town meeting member, chair of the warrant committee. Warrant committee assents to the change with one abstention. Everybody else was in favor of it. However, I am compelled by our discussion to underscore three things. First off, our intent is to also contribute to the protection of the integrity of the landscape of the town and support the committees through a collegial effort. Much has been said about process. We want to be as contributory and supportive of the process as possible. Secondly, we trust that the process that we are supporting will also take our recommendation as the planning board looks at this as a foundational development to contribute to the protection of trees, that they continue to look at it and to interject into this penalties that can be followed through. I know it's a planning article, but planning articles can contain terms that can encourage compliance, because I think there is certainly enough evidence and enough examples of a bait and switch that have happened in this town over the past 30 years to make us all aware of potential issues that could arise. And thirdly, in light of the many changes that came through, the warrant committee does its very best to be as careful with the production of the warrant. And of course, this particular warrant is easily the longest that we have done. It's 123 pages of printed material. Occasionally things get confused through the different edits that happened. I crave the indulgence. The warrant committee does not intentionally mislead. And those of you who find errors, I apologize, but please understand it is a human process and we do the very best we can, particularly given the timing and the pressures which come to us from a number of quarters. But short answer is we support the change.
Thank you, sir. With that, we'll proceed to the vote. It's a 2/3 vote. So what we're doing is we have a motion from the floor to adopt Article 41 with edits that were noted. I said it requires 2/3 vote as a zoning bylaw. So we could put up the poll. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. And on the phones? On the phones, please signify by saying aye. If in favor? And all those opposed, nay?
Nay. Nay.
Thank you. We can mute. And if we can close the poll and put up the results. The motion carries with a 2/3 vote of 197 in favor at 92%, 17 opposed at 7%, and 3 abstentions at 1%. So I declare a 2/3 vote. So with that, we move to Article 42. 42 has a couple things on it. So we have, by the way, I'm going to receive a friendly amendment from the planning board tonight because some of you may have noticed the same automatic renumbering of chapters and sections and paragraphs occurred in the printing of the recommendation, as had been noted in the prior article. I think we have about 20 minutes. We can probably get through this, I believe, and then I might reserve some time at the end to discuss the associate moderator. So with that, I will, unless I see an objection in the Q&A, I'll waive the reading of Article 42. And I see no objection. I'll now recognize the chair of the planning board, Denny Swenson. Since this was submitted by the planning board, Ms. Swenson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Denny Swenson, Planning Board Chair, Town Meeting Member Precinct 5. The National Flood Insurance Program requires communities to adopt and enforce floodplain management bylaws that meet minimum requirements. So in order for residents to be eligible for flood insurance, Section 4C of the zoning bylaw serves that purpose for Milton. Periodically, the requirements of the National Flood Insurance Program change, requiring communities to update their bylaws. The Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation issued a new model bylaw in 2020 with the necessary updates to local floodplain laws, including new definitions, information on variance procedures, and data submission requirements. The director of DCR's Flood Hazard Management Program had a hands-on role in assisting the planning board in drafting these amendments to make sure they are compliant with the most updated regulations. We ask the town meeting vote to approve these important amendments to ensure that Milton residents can continue to take advantage of the National Flood Insurance Program. And moderator, this would include the correcting the formatting so the lettering is corrected.
Okay, could you just list for the body the paragraphs that they're going to change?
Okay, in Section 5, use regulations,
Let's go to the pages. So we'll go to page 90, correct?
Oh, okay, I think so. Sorry. I don't have 90, but yes.
So I see 5C becomes 5A, correct? The audience sees that.
Yeah. Yep.
And then at the middle of page 91, where it says D, other use regulations, that becomes B.
Right.
Correct? Okay.
Correct.
Your next change is in the subsection called other use regulations. We have to then go within that D we just changed to a B on page 91. You see, audience, how all the paragraphs start with the letter G.
Yeah.
We're going to rename G through L to be A, B, C, D, E, F. Correct, Ms. Swenson?
Correct. Correct.
Now there's one more in section 6, local enforcement.
Yes, on page 92.
Let's go to 92. You see toward the top the word local enforcement. You can see the first paragraph starts with E and runs through H. I assume you want to strike those and have that become A through D.
Correct.
A,
The language in the article and the recommendation is identical. The subsections and subparagraphs were mislabeled due to a formatting error in the process of assembling the warrant.
Thank you. Any other comments on this before I'm just going to ask the warrant committee if they accept your friendly amendment? Just a second, please. Okay, any other comments, Ms. Swenson, or just okay to go to the warrant committee?
No, just the towns in Massachusetts with floodplains are doing this so their residents can continue to have the flood insurance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Warrant committee, as soon as you have an answer on this, adopting this friendly amendment.
Mr. Moderator, the warrant committee is in the process of taking a vote. We'll be back to you in a second.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Asher.
Yes, George Asher, Warrant Committee Chair, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 6, unanimous on the part of the Warrant Committee to assent.
Thank you. With that, does anyone wish to speak to this recommendation as amended? I see no hands. With that, we'll proceed to the vote. We can put up the poll. This requires a 2/3 vote. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. If we could unmute the phones. On the phones, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
You can mute. Thank you. And we can close the poll and put up the results. I declare a 2/3 vote with 200 yes votes at 99%, 2 no votes at 0%, and 1 abstention at 0%. So we have completed now 42. On 43, we might be able to get rid of 43 in short order because I've been notified by the planning board of a change in their opinion. So with that, I'm going to suggest we continue with 43. Unless I see an objection in the Q&A, I'll waive the reading of Article 43 and we'll proceed to recognize Ms. Swenson as the chair of the planning board. Ms. Swenson. And Ms. Swenson, you may want to recognize, ask Kathleen O'Donnell to speak to this.
Yes, I would like to recognize Kathleen. Yes, this is Denny Swenson, Planning Board Chair, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 5. I would like to honor Kathleen O'Donnell. I was told I'm supposed to say my name every time, and I haven't been, so thank you.
You are. All right, if we could, and thank you for doing so, Ms. O'Donnell, you're recognized.
Mr. Moderator, Kathleen O'Donnell, Precinct 7, Town Meeting Member and Planning Board Member. We had placed this proposal on the warrant to replace an extremely unwieldy temporary apartment bylaw with a new accessory dwelling unit bylaw, which would have established a more equitable and economical process for these sort of what are fondly known as in-law apartments. The development of accessory dwelling units, either in a new addition or in a separate building, is encouraged in our master plan and also by Governor Baker's housing choice legislation that was passed in January. I note that on the town's website, when I did the research, accessory dwelling units were proposed to this body as far back as 2015. I have no idea why nothing happened with that. After we had put this article in the warrant and had sought the support and got the support from the Affordable Housing Committee and the Affordable Housing Trust, we were notified of some technical difficulties and questions that were then ruled as beyond the scope of the article. And so the article requires further discussion and potentially some revisions to the article as drafted. And so therefore, actually, before I move to the motion, I would just like to say that we had prepared slides that discuss the differences between the temporary apartment and the accessory dwelling unit. And I know that you had mentioned, Mr. Moderator, that the slides and presentations that had been submitted to you have been posted on the town clerk's website, and I did not find those slides. And so I'm asking that if somebody could make sure that people interested in this subject matter could be seeing those PowerPoint presentation slides on the accessory dwelling units on the town's website. That would be very helpful.
By the way, I believe we put them on the town meeting page. So we'll double checking that, Ms. O'Donnell.
I just wanted to make sure. Because right now the process is the application has to go to the zoning board. They need a special permit. They need a variance. It can only be a family member. When the family member leaves, you have to rip the whole thing out. So it's really not very useful at this point. But all that being said, as I said, we had some interesting and actually a very helpful information submitted from town meeting members. And so we would therefore want to make a motion to withdraw the article and refer it back to the planning board for further study.
Very good. Is there a second in the Q&A? I see a second from Mr. Stephen Rhines. Thank you. With that, does anyone wish to speak to this motion to refer? And I see Mr. Neely and maybe Mr. Neely. Mr. Neely, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Rick Neely, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3. I support this motion. I think this makes sense to do this because the article does need more work. I find that it was incomplete and it's not really widely understood. I'm in full agreement with Ms. O'Donnell that the existing bylaw does need to be changed. There's no question that it needs improvement. However, I think what needs to be done is that we need to look at this in terms of this article as proposed here would have impacted 7,000 single-family residences in zones AA, single A, B, and C. That is not well understood by everybody. And I think that needs to be understood that all residential houses, single-family homes would have been impacted. The article needs to go back to the planning board because there is minimal zoning criteria contained. There is no description of what the setbacks would be. For example, my house is set in the setback. That should be addressed, whether it's an eligible property. My house is on a lot that doesn't meet the minimum zoning. Is that an eligible property? My garage is in the setback. Is that an eligible property? This article at the top of page 101 talks about leaving it up to the zoning board of appeals to have to decide what's an adequate size and configuration. And I think it makes sense to go back to the planning board in order to clarify and make it easier for the zoning board of appeals. They're certainly going to have a difficult situation trying to figure out what the criteria should be. I also think the planning board should collaborate with the schools in terms of what the impact on new students will be. So that when we're sizing up what our new school will be, what will the sizing have to be, or whether it would be a second school will be needed. So I think those are some of the things for the planning board to look at as they go back. I also would add that on page 102, in terms of parking, the zoning board, the planning board should look at whether parking should be allowed on the front lawn and the tree lawn. That's not clarified. And last but not least, I think the planning board should take into consideration what the impact is on the legal units, increasing the 10% requirement for the state affordable housing limit. So those are some of the factors that I think the planning board should look at when they take it back, and I support the motion. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Neely. Mr. Michael Perrone raised a point of order if the speaker is referring to the article or the motion. In my opinion, the speaker was giving reasons why this should be referred back, and he was just providing detailed examples. So I'd take his comments within the scope of the motion. Next, I see Mr. Furs, you're recognized. Hand down, Mr. Furs put his hand down. In that case, Mr. Furs put his hand up.
Sorry about that. Tried to unmute,
your words
lowered my hand.
speak. There you go.
Brian Furs, town meeting member, precinct 10. 6 years, 6 years we've been trying to put some zoning in place for this town that will allow people to have their parents live with them, have their children live with them, find diverse ways to provide housing in this community for people that can't afford homes in our town. It's been 6 years. For 6 years, we've seen people come up at town meeting and propose changes, or prior to town meeting, propose changes at the last minute that the planning board could not possibly respond to, or have gotten up at town meeting and talked about all of the potential disasters that could happen with 7,000 single family homes. It is time for this town to make some progress on providing diverse housing stock. And I would beg the people that come to the board with these good ideas at the 11th hour to start coming at the first hour, because otherwise we are never going to make any progress on this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Furs. Ms. King, you're recognized.
Ginny Donahue King, Precinct 3. I had a bunch of comments to make, and I have to edit them now. I agree that it should be referred back to the planning board for adding some things about this makes it easier to get a special permit for such an in-law apartment. However, the term in-law apartment rather than accessory dwelling units, I think really does need to be used. I think it's something that should not have an open-ended ending, an open-ended term on the on such an apartment. Currently, you know, they kind of disappear from being allowed once the person moves out and an alternate person hasn't been approved by the Board of Appeals to move in. I think that we need to, my comments now are input, I hope, for the planning board to make a better cut at this the next time around. I think we need to define who can be in some of these apartments. Otherwise, every single house will have one, because why wouldn't you? It will make for very densely populated neighborhoods, as well as very dense neighborhoods, you know, taking away trees, grass, and so forth that, you know, we were just talking about trees for a very long time. One of the new requirements is that no longer would egress from the in-law apartment be allowed through the principal dwelling. There are in-law apartments currently permitted that do indeed pass through the principal dwelling because the residents of the two living spaces are related and they kind of like seeing each other, which would not be the case, I guess, in some other instances where you didn't know the tenant quite as well. The proposed bylaw will make these previously permitted apartments non-conforming, yet the requests for these apartments, special permits, went through a more stringent permitting process than what is currently suggested in this proposed article. So this more stringent permitting process should be honored. What will happen when the holders of these special permits come before the Board of Appeals to extend their special permits, as they are required to do when the term of the permit is about to end? Will they be covered by the old law or the new? Will they be afforded the open-ended term that the proposed bylaw includes? Will they be required to convert the apartment into the principal dwelling as they are required to do according to their permits under the current law? There is no provision in the proposed bylaw for these circumstances. And I do speak, I don't speak for the Board of Appeals. I speak as somebody that has a great deal of experience having been on the Board of Appeals for these past couple of decades. These issues do come up. There is some question if the special permit holders granted under the current bylaw should even be afforded the provision of the proposed bylaw. There are special permits currently in effect that have specific conditions that must be met in order to be in conformance with the special permit. These conditions were added so as to address concerns of the neighborhood. They are not necessarily onerous. For example, not allowing visitors to park in the street for a house having plenty of off-street parking. But they do exist in a permit, but these conditions do exist, and a permit holder could lose the permit if a visitor of the in-law apartment parks on the street even for a quick visit. Even though the whole neighborhood may park on the street anyway. So it just seems a little bit odd that we would continue with that. In addition, on the issue of requiring the egress from an in-law apartment to not pass through the main dwelling unit, garages will be converted to apartments before people realize that they do in fact use their garages and want to build another garage. The Board of Appeals has seen requests for new garages to be built coming from the owners of houses where the former garages were converted into a den or perhaps an extension of the kitchen and so forth. So I'm not making this up. This is really what I've seen before us. Yet this requirement will force people into looking for a way to add an in-law apartment without having egress through the main dwelling unit. So the choice is to give up yard or a garage. Having garages converted to apartments with their own egress will encourage building out rather than within the existing dwelling. This makes the neighborhood denser physically as well as population-wise. Population density will also be affected by removing the requirement for the apartments being for family members only and having the term open-ended. While I understand the world's population is growing and housing is at a premium, I'm concerned that the wholesale granting of in-law apartments according to the proposed law will result in a fundamental and profound change for the town. In theory, increasing the number of in-law apartments might be a good thing, but the realities of allowing them to be created in such a way that they will exist forever and opening up to being rented by a completely unrestricted category of people goes too far. I firmly believe the article should be referred back to address these defects in it, and because we want to make sure that we have a town that is fundamentally the same while allowing for perhaps a little bit of different housing stock. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. By the way, in the Q&A, a number of members asked about whether the members' comments were pertinent to the motion to refer. I provide a lot of leeway to our members, and in Ms. King's case, she informed me in advance that her comments might be lengthy. She was well within her 10-minute time limit. She's one of the permanent members of the Board of Appeals, so she asked for the time and she used less than she said. So I grant leeway to members when they want to speak before town meeting. So with that, we'll just go to last two comments. Are any last comments from the chair of the Planning Board, and then we'll go to the Warrant Committee for their opinion on the motion to amend. I see Ms. O'Donnell, your hand is up, but I typically recognize the
I defer to Ms. O'Donnell.
Okay, Ms. O'Donnell, you have the last word from the planning board.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I would point out that we've been discussing this accessory dwelling unit bylaw for several months, or actually since last summer. I would ask that people who have comments on this article submit them to me or to the planning board through Tim, so that we can incorporate them into the discussion in preparation for a resubmission of this article in October. I would also point out that the idea of doing school studies and all those kinds of things, calling them in-law apartments, is probably illegal. There's just a recent decision that says that zoning boards can't take into account school impacts on zoning applications. And the idea of in-law or keeping that family situation is a problem that we have with diversity and equal access to housing, those sorts of things. But I would ask people that have comments that they'd like to make on this article to please submit them to the planning department so that we can incorporate them into our next meetings. And thank you very much for everybody's very helpful suggestions. I appreciate that.
Thank you, ma'am. Well, Mr. Asher, if you could give us a sense of the warrant committee. And while you're doing that, I'd also like to acknowledge the contributions of Mr. Whiteside. A number of members took the time to read this in advance. So Mr. Neely contacted me in advance. Obviously, the planning board did with their friendly amendment. Ms. King did in advance, and Mr. Whiteside spent considerable time with wording and language. He and I had some back and forth on the contents. I do want to acknowledge the labor and effort that some of the members put into this article and thank them for all your preparation, because it really does help your moderator to try to run a smoother meeting for all of you as members.
Mr. Moderator, George Asher, Chair Warrant Committee, Town Meeting Member Precinct 6. The Warrant Committee supports the motion to refer this to the Planning Board.
Thank you. With that, we'll go to the vote. This is a majority vote to refer back. We could put up the poll. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. And unmute phones, please. All in favor, please, on the phones, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Thank you. We can mute. And we can close the poll and put up the results. The motion carries by majority with 170 yes votes at 91%, 14 no votes at 8%, and 2 abstentions at 1%. So Article 42, what was that, 3? Carries, yes. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I doubt we're going to complete 44 to 48 tonight. I know there are presentations, there are motions to amend. Before we proceed to entertain a motion to adjourn, I wanted to entertain from the body a motion to elect Mr. Brian Walsh, who was a town meeting member from Precinct 8, as associate moderator for the purpose of conducting business in the annual town meeting in the absence of the current moderator. So if someone approves of that and could say so moved. I see Mr. Neely approves so moved. Is there a second? I see Mr. Rudensky as a second, Mr. Donald Rudensky. Is there any debate on this election? My comments back. I see no hands raised. So Mr. Walsh, would you like to come to the podium and perhaps accept your nomination and show your face to the audience while you're live on TV? So Mr. Walsh, do you accept this nomination if you were elected?
Ms. Moderator, I do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So with that, we'll proceed to the vote. It's a simple majority vote. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. And on the phones, if we can unmute, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. I think we can close the poll. The motion carries with the majority vote of 178 yes at 96%, 7 no at 4%, and 0 abstentions at 0%. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn, which I see by Mr. McCurdy, to adjourn until Tuesday, May 11th at 7:30 p.m. Is there a second? It is second by Mr. Scott Matthews. If we could put up the poll. All in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. If we can unmute the phones. On the phones, all in favor of motion to adjourn, please signify by saying aye. And opposed, no.
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
And I think we can close the poll. The ayes carry 167 at 94%, noes 10 at 6%, and abstains 1 at 1%. So we are adjourned until tomorrow night, Tuesday, May 11, 7:30 p.m. Thank you very much.